Welcome, everybody, to the Bob Dodd Show. Thank you very much for joining us today. In studio, I have one of my best friends here in Atlanta, Andrew Sawyer.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, dude. Thank you so much for coming back. I'm glad I didn't scare you on the first one. Dude, it's been a minute, dude, since we got a chance to hang out. A lot of big things happened for you. You have a really unique story. So you guys, we dived into that in the podcast earlier a couple months ago. Check that out. And you're also you're doing a lot of cool different things right now, and a lot of it's writing.
So I initially read the Iliad and the Odyssey 20 years ago, you know, and there's stuff in there that really has stuck with me, and I've been chewing on it for quite a long time. And I'm also a combat veteran, so a lot of what's in the Odyssey is about, you know, this guy who spent 10 years at war and now he's trying to figure out how to get home. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself in going through experiences that were very similar to the things that he went through, not necessarily from the physical standpoint, but from the human standpoint. Yeah. You know, so, so it's always been like a really profound source of wisdom, you know, for humanity at large, but it's really touched me for about 20 years. So when I heard that they were making a feature film about it, Christopher Nolan, you know, all that, and people were excited about it, I decided to go through just the story within the story, mainly, which is Odysseus. You know, the whole arc of the thing, it begins with Telemachus, his son, and he's absent. He's been absent for a long time, and while he's been, you know, he's the long lost king. While he's been gone, everything's kind of, you know, gone downhill, and there's all these suitors that are trying to marry his wife, and his son's growing up without a father, and you know, so the overarching storyline is, you know, the king is gone, he's lost, and while he's been lost, everything's gone downhill. But ultimately, the part that is most relevant, it has been most relevant to me, is his journey home. So, so after you go through all that stage setting, so to speak, you know, up in the first 7 or so books of the epic, then it finally gets to Odysseus. He's stuck on this island with the goddess Calypso, and then he finally leaves there. He's been there for 7 years, and he goes on to Scheria, where the Phaeacians live. And once he gets there, the king of Phaeacia King Alcinous wants to hear his story, so he tells this story. You know, so anyway, I thought that has been so helpful for me, and I've gleaned so much wisdom from it, and it's helped me through so many of the similar trials that I've gone through in my life, that I wanted to record that. And it's been on my heart to record it for a long time, but I'd never gotten around to it. But when I heard that Christopher Nolan was making a feature film and everybody was all buzzing about it, I thought, well, I might as well do it now, you know. So in December I started, and I went through. So in his own story, there's 9 primary trials that he goes through. So I wrote a blog series called The Way Home that goes through these 9 trials, and it's fun because and the movie has created so much more buzz than I expected. So I finished the series a few months ago writing it, and it you know, it's on Substack. Anybody can read it. It's totally free. And it got some attention, and I got connected to some other people who are also interested in the same sort of thing. Well, then I had the idea, you know, I'm gonna, because of the movie, I'm gonna create a post that within that post contains all 9 in order with a little introduction. So I did that, and then I thought, well, I'll put that out on X, you know, and boost it. I'll boost it for $100. So I paid $100 to boost it. I got 2 million views.
Wow. That's a lot of views, man.
But, you know, a very small percentage of those actually clicked through. But, you know, there's a lot of people that bookmarked it and stuff like that. So anyway, so we can start there if you want. So what I've been thinking about a lot as I've gotten older is the importance of story. And, you know, everybody lives in a story. And sometimes those stories change, and, you know, you find yourself breaking out of a story that you thought was the only story. And I think for a lot of people that happened during COVID, where they had this set up and, you know, they figured this is my story, this is how it's going to go. And then it got totally disrupted and things happened that were never supposed to be part of their story. And now they're living in a new story, and it's kind of disorienting, So I've spent a lot of time. I've gone through a lot of experiences like that, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about stories and their significance. And everyone, whether they think about it or not, is living within their own story.
Yeah, I mean, you're a good storyteller too. So when we are hanging out, especially like when it's like near a fire, we trade, history, like things about that happened to me, things about happened to you, and things like that. And the way you're able to tell stories, it really allows people to be there. Now, depending on some of the stories that you have, I just can't fathom it. It's like, that's crazy that happened to you or whatever, and I still have a nice picture in my head because of the way you tell your story. And the fact that you're doing this, and you're also doing it in a way where, I mean, it's making my brain think. Like I said, I'm not a reader, guys. And, I didn't realize you were, such a good writer. So knowing that aspect about you, being that you can perform writing where it tells a story and it's keeping you captivated and you're understanding what's happening in the story. It's almost like the way you speak your stories to me. Mm-hmm. You do it in a poetic fashion, and it really elaborates. It gives you a huge image to like think about what's happening in the stories and stuff like that. But I was impressed.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Very, very impressed.
So I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis, and I think I'm a fellow at the C.S. Lewis Institute in Atlanta, mm-hmm. and I've studied his works quite a bit. And he was a colleague of Tolkien, and they had their little club called the Inklings and all of that. But that ultimately, they inspired a whole generation, or even a few generations by this point, to really engage in stories and engage their imagination in a way that otherwise probably wouldn't happen. So I'm one of the beneficiaries of that. So he wrote a collection of essays, and I think it's called Of Other Worlds or something like that. So anyway, there's an essay in there about stories. So he has a few essays about the significance of stories and stories for children and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So one of the things he says is, there's so many narratives and books and nowadays movies where it's just a manipulation of the senses. So it's an action scene followed by another action scene, and you're up and you're down, and then you're scared and you're excited. And he says a book that's like that, for example, would be the Three Musketeers book. Oh. But mm-hmm. the great books are the books that people reread.
Yeah.
And after you've been surprised and excited, and the cliffhanger and all that, and you've seen the movie or read the story, then you know what's going to happen. So the next time, the element of surprise and novelty and all of that is gone. Mm-hmm. So if the story is only about those parts, then it loses all of its excitement mm-hmm. on the second or the third or the however consecutive, how many times you read it, But the good stories, all that action stuff and all the plot development and all that is really just a secondary thing. The primary thing is to engage you in the atmosphere of the mm-hmm. thing itself. So you're experiencing, for example, the War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells, you're experiencing the strangeness of these aliens and just how strange everything is. And so you enter into this scene and you imagine yourself as one of the people in the story going through the experience. And yes, the action and all that stuff is part of it, but ultimately it's not the primary part. And so what makes a good story is the atmosphere and being pulled into a part of the human experience. Yeah. So ultimately, one of the greatest of all stories is the Odyssey, and it has had that.
It's like 3,000 years old, right?
It's approximately 3,000 years old, and it has had that effect on generation after generation after generation. It still has a profound effect on mm-hmm. people today who are capable of engaging in it. But the problem is, academia, over the last generation has come to the place where they're dissecting things mm-hmm. and deconstructing, and then this is just they'll say the main purpose for the story is a political agenda or an imposition of power on someone else, or we're gonna go through this whole thing and read it through the lens of this guy was a slave owner or whatever, and that actually is an obstacle to engaging with the actual story. If you're only reading it trying to make a point about the author or trying to make a point about the current political situation, or you're ultimately hijacking something that was not meant to do those things and trying to, it's like a square peg in a round hole. And that really kills the thing. It's like dissecting it. In order to dissect a frog, you have to kill it first.
Yeah.
And all the life leaves it. And I think a lot of people who love literature and have gone to college to study literature have really been robbed of the opportunity to experience stories as they were meant to be experienced because of the analytical side of things. So, and that's obviously true of the Odyssey, and it's definitely true of the Bible and all the good stories. If you read literature about them, there's analysis and stuff like that.
Yeah. People really muddy up stories. I mean, especially when, for instance, Aaron Brockovich was just recently on a podcast, and they were talking about all the data centers and all the things that she's like uncovering and trying to help all these people. And she had brought up a story about Wizard of Oz. And she started saying like, oh, the Wizard of Oz, it was a story about, people, it's like what was to come. And, that Oz was the great big all power. And it's easy to dissect a story and insert modern themes and things. It doesn't mean what the writer was doing with the Wizard of Oz was truly writing about, the demographic of people, what they were going through, and all the different scenarios of people taking over. It was literally a science fiction story, when people put in their. It's like me trying to say, oh no, Radiohead, that song, Creep was not about whatever it was. It was about this, and it was just but that's just my interpretation. I can say it's about the moon landing. I could probably put any narrative behind whatever my mind can make up. Do you find that a lot with a lot of people that are talking about the Odyssey?
Well, honestly, I haven't engaged so much with people talking about the Odyssey until recently, and I've watched a few of the reviews and stuff like that. But so that's one whole. I would even call it a distraction. There's validity to the analysis and stuff like that, and there's interesting facts to be gleaned and stuff like that. But it's a distraction that prevents certain people from ever really engaging and living in, experiencing the story itself, and literature is like time travel. You have the opportunity to enter into this world, in the case of the Odyssey, that's thousands of years old, and experience it through the mind of whoever recorded it, Homer who recorded it, or whoever it was. And so the other thing that stories are not primarily about is facts. That's another problem with the modern mindset is, this if you tell stories to your kids. Like, I tell stories to my kids, and I don't necessarily include all of the same facts the same way. Yeah. Because the point of the story is the lesson. The point of the story isn't what time it happened and in what sequence it happened and the precise words that I said. And, I think, the cliche is that the wives are always like, no, it wasn't in the morning. It was in the afternoon. It's like, well, that's not the point, because that's not the purpose. That's not why men have been telling stories around campfires since the history of mankind. The purpose, the reason that we tell stories is to communicate the wisdom, and wisdom in the form of a story gets into you through the imagination. Yeah, which is, I think, the most effective way to do it too. So so not only have I been passionate about stories because I've benefited from them, but I have 3 kids, and I want to get wisdom into their skulls or into their hearts, and giving them lectures is a terrible way to do that. At least with my kids. I don't know about yours, but they seem like somehow resistant to any form of lecture or, didactic teaching. So, but stories, they are like every night we want to hear stories. They beg for stories. And I think it's not something that you necessarily have to grow out of. I think there's plenty of adults that love a good story. And, you know, that's why some people watched all of Netflix during COVID because of the stories, and you're engaging and you're learning about the human experience, and, you know, you're, you know, playing out things in your mind, and, you know, it's how we connect really human to human.
Yeah. One thing I really appreciated just about stories in general, it allows you to disconnect from whatever you are feeling and believing at the moment, because like I myself, I'm not married to like my opinions. I'm not married to my ideology, you know, necessarily. Like I am definitely easily persuaded when good information comes through. And that's why a lot of stories, when you are reading a story or listening to a story or watching a movie that's telling a story, a lot of times the storytellers does put facts in the story, and those facts are basically bricks for you to walk on. And that way you can know the time, kind of the place, and, you know, basically have a good grasp on like what people might have been going through and thinking. You know, like Homer, for instance, you know, he used a lot of locations in his stories that are real. And people are battling right now on the internet of like, Homer's story was true and Homer's story wasn't true. And it's just like, guys, why do you even fight over the fact whether if it's true or not?
It's more than true. So I think those people are looking at it from the standpoint of facts. So did this actually happen the way that it said that the story says it happened? Well, that's utterly beside the point.
Yes.
You know, it's not about the facts. It's about the moral of the story and the deeper truth. The true. So is this story true to the lived experience, and is it true to the human condition in which we all find ourselves? And the Odyssey is true in the deepest sense of true. It resonates with the human condition, and it has the ability to do that even over the ages and over, you know, all the variations of stories that have been told in the last 3,000 years. It still deeply resonates with our own lived experience.
Yeah. One thing, the reason why I connect to stories a lot of times is because of that fact, right? Because like if you're not, like I'm not going to sit there and, you know, take away from somebody that's so into Star Wars, right? To me, Star Wars is Star Wars. It's a sci-fi flick, and it's got a lot of action and a lot of twists and turns and things like that. But the majority of people who watch Star Wars really get into it. You know, they can see themselves in certain characters. Maybe sometimes they see themselves in all the characters because maybe they've been put in situations that, you know, they've lived some of those situations, not in the stars, but here on Earth, you know, whether not knowing their father, finding out who their father is, or, you know, some people fall in love with their sister. You know, in West Virginia or whatever, you know, but like Luke Skywalker and what's her name? Like they were brothers and sisters, right? And he fell in love with his sister. So it's like all these like weird things that happen in the movies do happen in real life sometimes, and people can digest it.
Well, everybody struggles with the temptation to the dark side too.
Yeah.
That's a very human thing. You know, the temptation to you know, go for the jugular, and you know, whatever it is I want in life, I'm going to go and take it. I don't care what the consequence is, and you know, that's a eternal draw that we have as human beings. You know, so anyway, so you know, I am very passionate about that, and for me, one of the reasons that, or one of the things that got me into stories in the first place was I moved a ton when I was a kid. I don't know if we talked about that last time, but I went to 9 schools before I finished high school. So, and lived in, you know, a ton of different places. My dad was very career oriented, and he was always starting new things and spinning new things. So, you know, it was nothing to him to move, but, you know, so I never really got to like stay in one place and settle down and develop roots. And I hated that when I was a kid, but the result, there, 2 really helpful things came out of it. First off, I realized that so much of the things in life are totally arbitrary. You know, so I'd be in one school system and the thing is basketball. And that was back in like Michael Jordan days. So, so the thing is basketball. So everybody's wearing basketball jerseys to school, and everybody's got trading cards. And if you want to be cool, you got to know all the basketball. So I get into basketball, and, so I'm doing that for 2 years, and then I move across town, and no one cares about basketball. It's football, or whatever. And it's like, so if all of this cultural stuff is kind of arbitrary and it's different in different areas and for different people, then what isn't arbitrary? So I saw that I stumbled into that line of inquisition really young. So what is, okay, so if so much is different every time I move, what isn't different? What can I like hold on to that is what are the common threads that go through every community independently of culture? So that line of thinking started for me when I was a kid. And the other thing is, because of that, the only constant companions I had were my books. So I got really involved in literature and reading at a young age. So like I read all the Narnia books when I think I was 7. I read the Lord of the Rings for the first time, the whole trilogy, when I was 8 years old. And, all kinds of stuff like that, like Fenimore Cooper. And, I wish I would have had the Odyssey when I was that young, but I really liked the book that inspired 300, Stephen Pressfield. I really like Stephen Pressfield. I read all of his stuff. Gates of Fire, that was phenomenal. I think I read that when I was 10 or something like that. So, but these books, like I said before, are books that are worth reading and rereading and reading. So whenever I was into a new school system and I was a new kid and I had to start over, I could go back and reread whatever my favorite books were and kind of escape for a little while and enter into a different story than the crappy story that I was living in, right?
Yeah.
So, but that I joined the military and I did some travel during that time, but I also worked for Delta Airlines for quite a long time. So I've been to about 70 countries. And so that line of thinking from growing up about trying to find what the common threads are throughout every group of human beings expanded during my travels as well. So, so I've seen all kinds of different cultures and been all kinds of different places, but the human condition is exactly the same. It is exactly the same no matter where you go. Everybody struggles with the same stuff. It just takes different forms, if that makes sense. And that's what the Odyssey really speaks to.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's why I think podcasts are kind of where they are now, like everybody and their mom has a podcast now, and, it's very, very flooded, but it's still worth doing, because when somebody finds a vein of a podcast and they are able to attach themselves to it, listen to it, they will get some knowledge, some appreciation. It allows them to escape. That's why I have a Hangout podcast, because some dudes, they're typing away and they want to think about something else while they're doing their daily task, because they can do their daily task in their sleep.
Guilty.
Yeah. And like, they're just listening to the podcast. Like, that dude just said a word that's not right. It's funny. Or I agree with that guy, or I disagree, whatever. So people attach themselves to the hangout aspects of these like podcasts, right? Because they get to talk about these stories. They get to talk about life that happens, that you so eloquently put it, like it happens everywhere. These things, these threads that tie human nature together. Everybody worries about their next car payment, or if I have a car, if I have a roof over my head, all these different things. Basketball's different than football. This part of town is really cool with lacrosse, and this guy wants to be soccer. And you kind of get a gist of what all these different communities are doing. But at the same time, it's like, oh, well, I still want to eat dinner and I still want to go to church, or I still want to go ride my bike. To the common thing when I was growing up, everybody had a bicycle. Everybody wanted a bike. Not everybody had a nice bike, but we all got a bike. And it didn't matter how cool of the bike it was. You could have the crappiest bike, 2 different types of tires. I don't know, the handlebars are bent right here and you're still driving and pedaling and doing whatever you need to do, but you had a bike. And that means you can go meet your buddies at the park that's like 2 miles away.
Yeah, so it's more than a bike. It's freedom, and it's the ability to hang out with your friends, and so it's it's an important part of the story.
Yeah. And these books are freedom, because like you could be stuck in a cell like many inmates do and have a book, and they lose the fact that they're behind bars and they're in a, closed, and it's just like they let them escape and live something different.
Yeah, and the best books and the best stories and the epics and the myths that have withstood the test of time, they reveal the central pitfalls of the human condition. So that's what the Odyssey does, is it shows us the traps and the things that tempt us in life, and the places that we tend to get stuck in life, and they're all related to not only the story that we see ourselves in, and the story you would tell about, how you got to where you are now, but the story you are writing for yourself has a destination in mind, and these destinations oftentimes can be deceitful destinations. You can chase fulfillment in certain ways, and the more you chase it, the more unfulfilled you feel. Mm-hmm. And that's a common theme. Well, that's those kinds of things. These cognitive traps and these pitfalls are in the ancient myths, and so much of the myth is communicating the wisdom of the wounds that we tend to have as human beings, and the pitfalls that we tend to fall into, the traps that we tend to fall into. So I think that's why I wanted to focus on my Odyssey series primarily on Odysseus's own story within the story about his journey home, because he is the archetype that goes through these 9 primary pitfalls, and those every single human being can relate to all 9 of them. I guarantee it. You just have to see them, and then you'll be like, oh, yeah, that's what it is. So I'd be happy to go through those if you want, or start wherever you'd like. And
no, man, let's start from the beginning, because I have to admit, I've tried learning about the Odyssey. I've tried learning about what places were real, what storylines, what was Homer like catering to, when he was writing the story and things like that. And I got to say, man, I flew off the deep end and lost control, and I don't know where I'm at with it. So, with your writing, like when you first started writing, you had an angle that you were looking at the story. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should tell folks like what your angle is. That way, they can get an idea of like why you're attacking it this way, or why you're going out about it.
Sure. Yeah. So one thing that came to mind as you were saying that is also, one thing that the vast majority of people are looking for in this short life that we have is significance, right? So how do I get significance within this life? And a lot of people are looking to do that through achievement or through acquisition. Mm-hmm. If I own a bunch of stuff, then I'm significant, or they're looking for significance through relationships or through politics. And the one interesting thing about this whole theme is the most significant person in the history of the Greek world is Homer, the storyteller. Yeah. Because that whole culture was built upon the story that he transmitted. Mm-hmm. Culture, ultimately, any culture is determined and shaped and formed by the story that it believes about itself. Yeah. And so it's so essential. And I've heard so many things, especially in the last few years, people lamenting on podcasts and articles and stuff like that the Western world as a whole has forgotten who we are. We've forgotten who we are. You've probably heard that.
Yeah. And we have no culture.
The Western civilization is dying because we've forgotten our roots and we've forgotten who we are, and everybody's lamenting about that. But the way to remember who you are is to remember the stories that made you what you are. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what defines the people. So the primary example of this would be the Hebrew people. They are the people who were rescued out of Egypt and went through the Red Sea, and they have these rituals on an annual basis to remember each of these things, and they pass the story on to their kids, who pass it on to theirs, and they hold on to that cultural heritage, and they have not forgotten who they are. No, but so many other people have, and the reason is because they've lost touch with the story, so,
Yeah.
but the Odyssey is one of those stories that we can get back in touch with. And as far as significance goes, storytelling is actually one of the most meaningful and significant things that you can do. And Homer is far more remembered than the wealthiest people or the most accomplished people, or Achilles, the great warrior. He's only remembered because of Homer, and or who knows who the politicians were at that time. Well, you consult Homer. He told you it was Agamemnon or whoever. So he's the key. He's the thing that holds it all together. And that story had an enormous impact on Greek culture. Even today it still does. So anyway, just to get that out there.
Yeah, no, that's great. So like when you were sitting down and you were like, man, I got to start somewhere. Like, how did you find the place to start? Like
Well, the place that it started for me was when my story started to reflect Odysseus's story. And this happened for me in 2011. So, so these great stories, and the Bible is like this too. They're almost like seeds, so you allow the seed to come into the fertile soil of your heart or your mind or whatever. And under the right conditions, the seed puts out roots and then it starts to sprout, but that might not happen for years and years. That seed lays dormant, but it's there. But then when you go through the right circumstances in your life, all of a sudden it begins to sprout, and eventually fruit comes out of it, right? So that's what happened for me with the Odyssey in 2011. So what happened in Odysseus' story? So like I said, the chronologically, the story of the Odyssey itself, it starts with him at the end of his journey, where he's on Calypso's island, but he went through all these trials before that, but he has to make it to the courts of King Alcinous of the Phaeacians, and then he begins to tell a story and goes back to the beginning. So the first thing that really happened after they left Troy, so they're this, they're like the first Vikings, so
so the Battle of Troy happened and he's on his way home, right?
The Battle of Troy happened, the Trojan horse was his idea. So he's credited with the thing that won the victory after 10 years of conflict. And the Greeks, who everybody thinks of as the civilizing people, were actually the barbarians in this story. The Trojans were the ones who were living in a walled city and they were civilized and they had, agriculture and all that stuff. And the Greeks were the ones that came by ship and to pillage and to burn and to all that, like the Vikings. So anyway, so they did that for 10 years and they finally, because of Odysseus's cunning and his craft, he's this very clever man, managed to win the war. And so then they set off in victory. And so the first place that they wind up is this island. It's called Ismarus, and there's a people there called the Cicones that live there. And I'm probably, a little disclaimer, I don't speak Greek, so I'm probably going to butcher some of this.
Yeah, but I think it's allowed.
I'm doing the best I can. There's a problem if you only read things and then you get in the habit of reading them a certain way and it's wrong, it's really hard to revert, but so I appreciate your patience with that. So anyway, they go to this island of the Cicones and they're just fresh from the war. And they've gone through, they've won and all this, but so they get to this island and, well, why not plunder it? We're the big badass warriors who just came fresh from battle, and the Cicones were allies of the Trojans, so they were on the other side. So why not kill all the men and take all the women and plunder all their resources? So that's what they do. So they land on the island and they go in and basically have a massacre and take all the stuff, and then all the soldiers get drunk. And they're, slaughtering all the livestock and the sheep, and it's just this big raging party. And Odysseus starts to regret that he did it. And then reinforcements arrive, and they wind up killing 6 men from each ship. And there's a bunch of ships, so I think there's, I don't know, maybe 20 ships. So so that would be 120 people die. So they push off because of that. So okay, so the men, when they went through the war, and you can argue whether the war was justified or not, but when they went through the war, they experienced things, and when they experienced these things, they got infected by the war. They got infected, so to speak, with evil, with violence, and with the willingness to do anything it takes to survive, and all these things. And this is common, even today with today's warriors. So I went through a similar experience. I was deployed in 2006 was my last deployment, and I went through war, and then I came home, and you get home and you have to make this adjustment, but you still have this violent tendency and this, these experiences that stick with you. And then, you get into, like I got into a couple of bar fights. You get into these situations that are regrettable because the war is still in you. And so that's what happens with them. So they push off from Ismaris and they wind up drifting, or the wind blows them to this island of the lotus eaters. So they land there, and there's this people there that all they do is eat the lotus flower all day, and it gets them high.
It makes them want to stay.
Yeah. So this is the first primary pitfall that we all face as human beings, is this desire to avoid our regrets by pushing them down and numbing ourselves, and getting high or using substances, or even just pushing them out of our consciousness. And this idea of I don't even want to think about my past. But also what happens with the lotus is they forget their home, so they don't even want to go home. They just want to stay there and just eat the lotus all day and just get high all day, right? So in 2011, so I got out of the military in 2006. And in 2011, I went and I visited my buddy Ted. You've met Ted.
Yeah. Shout out to Ted.
Yeah. And he was stuck on the Lotus Eaters Island. And so what that looked like for him was he was doing heroin because he didn't know how to cope with all the trauma that he went through and all the things that he went through. And so, and he was, tempted to assume, as we all are, that to deal with it would be much more difficult than it might actually be. And so instead, I'm just not going to deal with it. I'm going to avoid it, and then eventually that path led him downward and downward and downward until the point where he's doing heroin. So, so what Odysseus does when his men are on the island of the Lotus Eaters is he goes in there and he grabs them. I imagine it almost like he's grabbing them by the ear, but he grabs them. He had only sent a scouting party out. So he grabs his scouts. They're all high. They're resisting him, but he grabs them, he pulls them in, he puts them on the ship, he ties them to the benches, and he commands all the men to row, and they leave the island of the Lotus behind. So the way to get out of those seasons in life where you're tempted to just be totally complacent and avoid all your problems and seek comfort in the form of avoidance and all of that is to get the hell out of there. Right. Yeah. So when I went up there to Wisconsin and I was visiting Ted and he's doing heroin, I thought, I can't just let my friend die. So what am I going to do? So I thought, well, I'm going to get him out of here. So I'm going to do what Odysseus did. I'm going to get him out of here. So I went and I rented a U-Haul truck and I packed, he was passed out after shooting up. I packed his whole apartment up into the U-Haul truck, woke him up, made him get in the passenger seat, and drove him across the country to Atlanta from Wisconsin because I wanted to, rescue him or save him or get him out of that situation. And so that's what I did. But the problem is, Odysseus and his crewmen were able to leave the island of the Lotus behind. But in the modern day, we can get Lotus wherever we go. And nowadays you can order it, with a keystroke and a few clicks, and it will be delivered next day to your house. And you can numb yourself to your heart's desire for years and years and years. And people do that, because they're avoiding things. And so he found a new source once we moved down here. So I'll give you some space to talk. I need to take a little break.
Yeah, no, this is why your story is so powerful. I mean, we have common things that happen between us. You know what I mean? We all have friends who, do things that they shouldn't be doing, or, I'm not going to give any specifics or anything, but we all have friends that need a helping hand in a lot of different ways, or family members that needed a helping hand. And, the fact that, a great warrior is able to see what's happening with his men and see okay, something here is wrong. Some people don't even nowadays have the audacity to say, I see what's going wrong with my boys. I'm so so busy with what I have going on. Like, I think that the fact that, you know, a great person can see that and actually pull somebody from the darkest depths of where they're driving themselves to, you know, it's like a lot of people don't do that nowadays. I don't think so. I don't hear a lot of people doing that.
Well, that's precisely the theme of the Lotus Eaters Island. It's not only the temptation to numb oneself to one's own problems, but it's also I would call it just the temptation to complacency as a overarching theme. So, you know, you hear about someone that's really struggling and you think, I wish I knew what to do, but I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. That's called complacency.
Yeah.
You know, where you know, well, I really should do something, or, you know, or I really should have that difficult conversation. There's something I know I should probably do, but it's uncomfortable and I'm not sure how to do it, so I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
You know, that's what complacency is.
Yeah.
And so that's ultimately, you know, the lotus is not just the symbol of addiction. You know, and there's another episode in the Odyssey that hopefully we'll get to at some point that's the other side of addiction. But this side of addiction is the addiction of avoidance. You know, the reason I'm addicted is because I need this substance to avoid the feelings that I don't want to deal with and to avoid the memory of the things that I've done. In this case, the massacre of the Sicones. You know, I want to avoid that and avoid my regrets and avoid all that. But in the course of that avoidance, you lose touch with who you are and you lose touch with your purpose, and everything becomes ultimately meaningless.
Yeah.
This pattern is a pattern of complacency, but ultimately, each one of these pitfalls also has a fantasy attached with it, or if you want to use the biblical word for it, it would be an idol. So this fantasy in the case of the Lotus Eaters Island, and the thing that gets us caught in this particular trap is the idea of comfort.
Was there another side of the story with the Lotus Eaters? Like, the Lotus Eaters knew that this plant or this drug would do this to the people. Like, what was I think that there's like a story within that too. Like, the Lotus Eaters kind of tricked the people, right?
No,
that's not a trick.
Think of it like a bunch of potheads. You know, they're like, "Oh, come on, pass it over."
Oh, we're having a good time.
Yeah, and we're just going to do this every day.
Yeah, everything's so good here.
Just go with the flow, man. There's no conflict here. You know, that kind of thing.
Come as you are.
We're just going to be comfortable, and you could spend a lot of time. People spend their entire lifetime on the Lotus Island, but the fantasy that they have is comfort. The interesting thing about each one of these traps, and this is no exception, is that the more you pursue these fantasies, the more you get the opposite of what you're pursuing. So the more preoccupied you become with the idea of comfort, the more sensitive you become to every discomfort.
Yeah.
You know, so there's another story that kind of captures that piece of this, and it's called The Princess and the Pea. You might be familiar with it, you know, but you know, eventually she's laying on 100 mattresses and she can still feel the pea all the way through, you know, so she's incapable of being comfortable because she's pursued this fantasy of comfort to a grotesque extent. And that's what happens with us. So you chase comfort and you wind up being less and less capable of actually being comfortable, or you need more of the lotus, or you need more of the whatever, or and so the other thing that happens is when you avoid your problems because it's just too uncomfortable to deal with this, I'm just not going to deal with it, they grow and they fester and they get worse. And eventually, you know, you've got trails through your house of all the garbage that you haven't dealt with. And then it becomes even more difficult to even consider doing anything about it. It becomes overwhelming. So it's a trap.
Yeah. Yeah. So when, you know, you mentioned your friend, so he gets another addiction, and
it was the same addiction. Yeah. Just in a different place.
Just a different place.
Zip code. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, how now with where you're writing and things like that, now basically tell us, like, because you're telling us where you started, how your writing's from, and from moving from that, where do you go next?
So in my own story, I had kind of connected that theme of, all right, I don't know what this is going to take to resolve, but I know that he can't stay here. So we're going to start by getting him out of here.
Yeah.
So that's what I started with. Well, then, so, and your question is great because in the Odyssey and all these myths, they're excellent for revealing and speaking to the traps that we fall into, but they're not that great at speaking to how to get out of the traps.
Yeah.
So in this case, it was Odysseus's self-control. So he had the virtue of self-control, and he had the self-control to go into the Lotus Eater's Island without eating the lotus, and to pull his men out and to recognize that they needed to be pulled out. So he had the self-control to do that. And that's ultimately the thing that got them out of there was his self-control. But in the story, that's just a geographical thing, So, but I had to learn that in my own way. So in my story with Ted, I thought, okay, now that I've moved him, now I'm going to try to control the circumstances and make it impossible for him to keep his addiction. So, which is the opposite of self-control instead of looking inward and trying to control that, I was looking outward and trying to control all the variables. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible way to go about it. And anybody who's dealt with an addict in their life knows this because they're the sneakiest people there are. And so,
they're creative.
I'm rooting through the house, trying to find his stashes, flushing him down the toilet. I got him, I admitted him to an inpatient clinic a couple times, and and he's also suicidal at the time. So I'm talking about a suicide on a regular basis. He's got this story that he's stuck in.
Yeah.
And it's a story of despair, and he doesn't see any way out. And in his story, there's no way out other than suicide. So, so I'm arguing with him about it and all this. And I did this for 6 months and really tried to take control of the situation, but it was outside of my control. And the more you try to control something that you can't control, the more out of control you feel. It's another one of those things, and there's another episode in the Odyssey about that theme as well. But it had gone really downhill. So I was being mentored at the time. I was leading a men's small group at Buckhead Church, and I was meeting with the director of men's groups on a weekly basis. And he was keeping tabs on the situation. He said, "Man, this isn't sounding good. You got to do something different. This isn't going to take you where you want to go." So he's like, I recommend just taking a sabbatical. Just honestly, you need to remove yourself from the situation and go and pray about it and recharge and just get your head straight and then come up with something else. Cause what you're doing is not good for either of you, So I took his advice and I went out and I put myself on a plane out to Oregon. I went out to Mount Hood and hiked around Mount Hood for a week. And, I brought my Bible and prayed about it. And, and my prayers at that time were like, Lord, I know what needs to happen. So just help me to make it happen. I already have it figured out. I just need your power to empower me to make my plan work. Yeah. And you come to find out he doesn't really answer those, So I was there for 7 days and basically praying stuff like that. And I became a Christian. I met Jesus on my last deployment in 2006. So it only been, 5 years or something like that. And I'd seen some things, but this was the biggest thing I dealt with up till then. So on the last day there, I was really frustrated and felt like I hadn't really gotten the answers that I was seeking, and I didn't have any confidence that things would get better when I got back, and I didn't really feel rested because I was still anxious about the whole situation and thinking, this is up to me. And, so I had my own story going on at the time about it, like I'm the hero of this tragedy in some way. So anyway, so I did one of those, coin flips, or, you randomly open the Bible and, put your finger down, I'll read this, so I did one of those, which, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, I plot my Bible down and opened up, I put my finger down, and it was in John chapter 16. And it's Jesus talking about the Holy Spirit. And he says, I'm going to leave you, but it's good for you that I'm leaving, because when I leave, I'm going to send the helper, the Holy Spirit. And when he comes, he's going to convict. And that was like a lightning bolt in my soul, like kaboom, like that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
I was trying to convict him. Ultimately, I was trying to convict him, and it's not my job.
No.
So I was really convicted about my inability to convict anybody else.
Yeah.
Because, and like I said, with my kids, I was like ultimately just trying to like lecture him. Like, can't you see what you're doing? It's not a good thing. It's a downhill slide. You don't have to live this way and all that. But I just wasn't getting through. It wasn't getting through. And it was ultimately because I was trying to play a role that I'm not capable of playing. I'm not the agent of conviction. So the form that self-control took for me in my own story is it took a lot of self-control to stop trying to play the role of the agent of conviction. Yeah. And so that hit me so hard. Like the whole flight home, I was like, how could I not have seen that? Like I was the problem the whole time. Like I was actually the obstacle to the thing that I wanted. Yeah. So I got home, and so I had already exhibited the self-control like Odysseus exhibits of, getting the U-Haul and packing his crap and moving him across the country. And, honestly, that's the easy part. That's the physical part. But these lessons that are captured here in these ancient texts, they're spiritual lessons, and they really are. And so hopefully you can understand what I'm talking about as I give you the story. So self-control in the spiritual sense is ultimately not trying to control my circumstances, and not trying to control the situation, and not trying to control his behavior, and not trying to convict. So I had asked for wisdom multiple times. The scripture says, if anyone prays for wisdom, the Lord will give it generously without finding any fault. And you can like rest on that. So I had done that. And the wisdom that I got was stop doing basically everything you're doing and just pray. That's it. So that's what I did. And it took a lot of self-control. It was really difficult, because you think that you can do more than you really can. And it's so tempting to try to get your hands on things that your hands don't belong on. But so I stopped all the stuff, and just every day, every morning, I'd start off and get out of my bed and get on my knees and just pray. And it wasn't anything religious. It was, Lord, you said in your word that you would convict, and that's your job and not mine. So I'm asking you to do that in this situation. And I don't want to see my friend die. So if you can convict him and get him out of this, do it. And if not, then thy will be done. That's basically what my prayer was. So I did that. And like I said, it takes a lot of self-control, even just praying and not allowing all the thoughts to distract you takes a lot of self-control. But self-control is a lot more possible, and it's a lot more attainable than what everybody else is trying to do, which is control all the things that are never going to be within your realm of control. So I did that for 40 days. And on the 40th day, I was in the middle of prayer, and I felt like this really strong compulsion to go play my guitar. And I was like, I'm not done praying yet. I'm not going to do that. So, but it was like weirdly strong. I don't know how to, like almost like a craving. Like I can't not do this. Yeah. So I got up and went over and grabbed my guitar, and I hadn't even touched it for like a year, and the pick was missing. So I'm like, oh, okay, the pick's missing. What am I supposed to do now? And then I had this certainty kind of wash over me. It's in his pants pocket upstairs. And this wasn't like an audible voice or anything like that, but it was more like I just knew the pick is in his pants pocket. So I walked upstairs, and I picked up, he was passed out, and he was, he's doing heroin. So he's sleeping till like 2 p.m. And this is like 5 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And, his pants are there. I pick up his pants, put my hand in there. The pick is in his pocket, and there's a heroin needle in his pocket. So I'm standing there with a guitar pick and a heroin needle, looking at it in my hand. I'm thinking, am I still supposed to play my guitar? Like, what am I supposed to do? This is really weird. This is the first experience I had that was like this. And I just felt like, no, something in me, or the Holy Spirit made it very clear to me that it's time for him to wake up. It's time for him to wake up. Okay. So what does that mean? It's time for him to wake up. That's what it means. So I put the stuff on his dresser and walk over, and he's totally passed out. I put my hands on him and say, Ted, it's time to wake up. And he goes, "Whoa," and like sits straight up, and he starts bawling. And he's like, I'm so sorry for what I've been doing. I'm so sorry for putting you through this. I can't believe that you've put up with all of this for so long. And he was convicted.
Oh, wow.
And all I did was stop trying to convict him.
Yeah.
And pray.
Yeah.
And, I told that story to another guy a few years ago, and he said, well, I think you also were loving him, and he could feel that you were loving him, and all that stuff that you were doing was getting in the way of him feeling that you were loving him. And I think that's a really valid point. But ultimately, he was convicted. So I put him. I called his family and got him on a conference call. They had all like totally given up on him. We put him on a flight the next day. He went out to rehab in California, and he was convicted to the point where he desperately wanted to change. And that's the only way that change actually happens for people who are stuck in addiction like that. They have to desperately want it.
Yeah.
And I think we're not necessarily capable of choosing our own desires. That's something that, but that's certainly something that the Holy Spirit can do. So, and that's what happened with him. So he got clean, and he has never gone back to heroin. That was in 2011, and he got married a couple of years later, and his story continues. But that really, so what that did for me as I reflected on it was, oh, okay, so I went into this situation thinking like I'm playing the role of Odysseus, and that it's my virtue that's going to solve the problem. But there's a deeper level than that. And it's ultimately, yes, self-control is the solution, right? But the reason that it's the solution is because there's someone else who's going to do the work. And the self-control is me not trying to do a job that's not mine, if that makes sense. And as it turns out, self-control is an attribute of the fruit of the Spirit. And so when that lesson, when that wisdom, that seed of wisdom that had gotten into me somehow sprouted and took root and began to fruit, it bore the flavor of self-control.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have the first dot connected. We've got this cognitive trap, so to speak, or this trap, this pitfall of the human condition, which is complacency, which comes from a desire to seek ease and comfort and avoid all of your problems. And the way to get out of the trap is not just a change of location and a self-control with regards to that, but a self-control of my own desires themselves to be the hero, so to speak, of the story. Yeah. And that's something that comes from the Holy Spirit. So the trap is revealed in the Odyssey, but the way out of the trap is revealed in the Holy Scripture.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started connecting the dots, all the way back in 2011. Yeah. So as it turns out, there's 9 attributes of the fruit of the Spirit.
Okay.
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And there's 9 island or trials that Odysseus goes through in the Odyssey. And they're in the exact same sequence as the fruit of the Spirit. And so I had begun to put those pieces together, and I still have yet to see that same thing anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, we should describe that to these folks, because maybe they will, maybe this is an eye opener for them. You know what I mean?
And so that moved these themes for me out of the physical dimension into the spiritual dimension, because these traps are spiritual traps, and it doesn't matter where you are geographically, you can still be tempted to avoid difficult things by being complacent and trying to be comfortable through avoidance, and you can still get trapped in the same thing regardless of what your environment is, right?
Yeah.
Physical environment. It's a spiritual thing, you know, or it's a psychological, you could call it a psychological thing. So all 9 of the pitfalls that he goes through are all answered by the fruit of the Spirit. So that's ultimately my thesis for the series that I wrote. And I happen to have had the opportunity in life to go through all 9 of them, you know, on my own, the hard way, you know, like an idiot.
I think we all go through things the hard way. Not many of us have a mentor that can mentor on everything. So there's bound to be something where we don't have somebody and we have to go through it the hard way.
Well, for me, and you know, so another word that's given to the Lord is the wonderful counselor. And that would be an example of his counsel. So I went out and I was trying to find answers, and he gave me exactly what I needed at the last possible moment, right when I had started to come to the conclusion that I wasn't going to get any answers, and, you know, felt sorry for myself. That's when he gave me what I needed. And it was just a little twink, you know, and then it's kaboom. It just blew my mind.
Yeah.
But he is the wonderful counselor. So even if you don't have a human relationship, you know, the thing about Jesus is he's a resurrected Lord, and that means he's alive right now, and he always lives to intercede for us, and he's available, and he's not far from any one of us. And if we seek his wisdom, and if we seek his guidance, he is not stingy about providing it, you know. But he's not going to give us what we think we want. He didn't give me what I thought I wanted. He gave me what I needed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in all cases, we always want something we don't need. Like, we had a really good conversation last time about abundance and what abundance does. You know, I think that everybody who walks on this earth, we all want the same thing. Some people want things more than others, you know, and we tend to not remember what we have already because we're always on the excursion to gain more or do something different, you know, and I'm guilty of it. I'm always looking for an adventure. I'm always looking for something else. And, you know, sometimes I have friends like you that kind of like, you don't slap me back into reality, but through conversation and, you know, witty sentences or really direct and pointed, you know, conversation, I'm reminded that, you know, of certain things, you know, and I think you do that in the writings that I was reading with this series. I mean, you know, once again, I'm very impressed that you're a writer. You know, I never put too much thinking into it, that, you know, because I have friends that are great at a lot of things, and, you know, you're great at many things, and writing is one of them. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, where did he come up with a lot of the stuff that he is writing? I know you read a lot, but still, like, there's a muse, or there's like something that comes to you, you know what I mean? Like,
it's inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah. Like a total inspiration. Like, so your life, the inspiration you got for these writings came from what happened to you in life and what you've surrounded yourself in literature and certain things.
Well, like I said, you know, that particular line of thinking, of trying to understand what the common things are, regardless of whatever culture and whatever circumstance you find yourself, the common threads that tie all of humanity together, that came from my childhood experience. And that wasn't something that I chose. And honestly, it was terrible. It was a terrible experience. I hated my childhood, and you know, I hated high school, and I hated all this. And it was, you know, I was being uprooted constantly and never had any kind of sense of stability. And my dad was working all the time, and I, you know, I was on my own ultimately. But I developed a very keen awareness of what is common, regardless of where I go. And I think that's something that I was somehow forced to pay attention to. So the other thing that also has led to and the cultivation of my way of thinking is my line of work. So when I was in the military, I was a air commando, which means I was part of a special operations wing, and I worked on combat talent aircraft, and my job was the crew chief. So my job was to make sure that the airplane was performing as the mission required. So that meant everything from, putting the right amount of fuel on it to configuring the inside and setting up the benches and, whatever, breaking or fixing whatever is broken or whatever needs to be done. So troubleshooting all kinds of problems. And, so my entire career from that point was, pursuing the question of what's causing this problem, what's actually wrong. And aircraft are relatively complicated systems. And oftentimes it's like the seventh thing that you try that turns out to be the thing that was causing all the other problems. But that line of thinking of, root cause analysis was really baked into me. And it was, it was forged in fire because I was involved at the very beginning of both, I'll just call it the global war on terror. And there was a lot of stress and, we got a very important mission that we're trying to accomplish, and the airplane has to perform and lives are at stake. And I'm freaking 19 years old with the weight of that. And so I really wanted to figure out what the hell was wrong and make sure that when I dispatched the airplane, the crew chief is the guy that waves them off and salutes. I wanted to make sure that they were going to come back, or if they didn't come back, it had nothing to do with my job. So after I served, I went to college and got my engineering degree, and I also studied German, which was helpful from the literature standpoint. That's how I didn't get much humanities in English, which was probably a good thing because at that time it had already begun to be corrupted. But I read all the classic German stuff, and that was very important to be familiar with. But I went and worked at Delta Airlines, and at Delta, it's the same kind of thing. We weren't designing things necessarily. We were maintaining a fleet of aging aircraft, and there's always constantly things that are going wrong with them, and someone's got to figure out what's going wrong, and that became my responsibility. So, for 15 years, I was doing root cause analysis on, multi-million-dollar aircraft and trying to figure out, and when you have, so my last role there was on the 737 fleet management team. So, we had, 200 or so airplanes, and they're each flying an average of 8.5 hours a day. So every year that passes on the calendar, you're getting like 20 years of flight data, and there's just a ton of data, and there's sensors everywhere. And then, something breaks on one airplane, and then it starts to break on another, and then you have a trend. And we had this index called the reliability index that categorizes what's causing us the most pain in the operation. So then I would take, whatever I could off the list that wasn't already being addressed and investigate it and try to figure out what's really going wrong here. Right. So that line of thinking is, I've spent most of my life, even from a child, thinking about that, from that perspective. And I think it's relatively unusual. So, but I applied it not only to these machines that I was being paid to, improve the reliability on, but also to myself and to human beings. And I think that yielded a lot of wisdom. That has yielded me a lot of wisdom in thinking like, okay, so we have these symptoms, symptomatic, in an aircraft, it's nuisance faults or whatever, but in a human being, it might be, self-destructive behavior. We have this symptom, but it's never the symptom that needs to be dealt with. It's always the cause. So we got to get down to the cause. So what's the cause? And underneath at the bottom, what's the real issue? So for Ted, in the story that I told, his real issue was complacency and seeking comfort through avoidance, and this desire to just forget about everything and forget all his problems, and this like short circuit in his story where he believed he was stuck in this story that there's nothing that he could do to deal with all of his problems, and they just kept on getting bigger and bigger, and the best that he could do would be to cope with them through getting high all the time. But that resulted in all kinds of symptoms. But so that's been and it's not necessarily a line of thinking that I chose either. But it's been my passion to understand it's been a very helpful thing to understand at the root level, what really causes things to go wrong, not just with the outside world and machines and so on, but with people. So.
Yeah, you do that. I mean, like you do that in your everyday life. I mean, gosh, I've been friends with you now since 2017, right?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's 9 years. Huh?
I know.
Crazy.
And, you're always one of my go-to guys when I have to like run something by somebody, and I don't do it often. So you might hear something goofy from me, once in a blue moon or whatever, or just like, hey, I'm having troubles with this, or hey, this sucks. What's your thoughts on it? You've been a real good source of, help. And, it's like, it's in your human nature to help. It's not in everybody's human nature, but you have it, and I think that because of that, you always are looking at things in this way of thinking, and you come at different angles where I don't hear anybody coming at from the angle that you see things. And it charges me to know, like, all right, well, this is going on. I need to hear what Andrew thinks about this. Because it's so refreshing to hear things from your point of view, mainly because it just makes a ton of sense to me. It's like you break it down into layman's terms, thank you.
Well, that's the most difficult part for me, is not only understanding what the problem is, but being able to communicate it to other people.
Yeah. Well, you're really good at it.
So at Delta, the thing about the airline industry is it's so heavily regulated that anything you do to the airplanes, you have to write a substantiation report, which is you're substantiating the change or the alteration or the repair or whatever. And it's multiple pages of, we've been experiencing this problem on these airplanes, and this is all the things that have been happening, and here's all the ways that it's shown up in the data, and here's what we're going to do about it, and here's why it's okay that we're doing this. And then, so you have to write this big report, and then you have to send it to a checker, and then they have to read through the whole thing and check it and find all the errors, and then you have to revise it, and then you have to send it to the approver, and they go through it with a red pen and find all the errors again, and so it's this tedious process of writing and revising, and no matter how well you think you've gone through the first draft, someone's going to find an error.
Yeah.
Sometimes you find an error after you publish it, and then you have to go through the whole revision process and check it back out and do the whole thing all over again. But I went through that process probably 1,200 times over my 15 years. So this is not enjoyable writing.
No.
Right. But it developed my ability to communicate the problem and the symptoms of the problem and the solution to the problem, and to organize my thinking in a way that I can communicate it with other people. And it was actually a really valuable skill to have, completely independently of the subject matter that I was working with.
I think it should be, taught in academia, those skills, because I think a lot of kids nowadays, they're not thinking things through. They're not able to see what the root problems are. And I think, we can go in a rabbit hole and put our tinfoil caps on and say, like, that's all by design because, the government just wants lemons working for them. But at the same time, I noticed one thing that with my kids compared to maybe some other kids, and I noticed that through the homeschool aspect, there are just some subjects that our kids never have to think about. And when kids are in public school, there's certain things that they have to think about. And a lot of people equate that to like public school's a real world. And it's like, no, man, my kids live in the real world too. It's just, what's being fed to them in a public school and what we're feeding to them. I guarantee you, if you put, any of my kids up to a kid that's doing school in a public school, they wouldn't be that far apart from one another as far as academics go. But it's just like the outside influences of certain things, even if it's Minecraft, right? Like, we have to calibrate our life all the time. And one way of calibrating our life is finding out what's wrong and what are the root problems for those things that are wrong. And I just noticed that a lot of people need that skill and don't have it, you know?
Well, what happens,
including me,
people get stuck.
Yeah.
You get stuck. You decide, I want to, there's a thing called comfort culture. You decide, what I want to prioritize in my life right now is comfort. And then the more you chase the wind, so to speak, the more uncomfortable you become, and it becomes a self-defeating thing, and you get more and more stuck. And, and there's 8 other ways to get stuck like that as well. And like I said, they're all revealed in the Odyssey. But yeah, absolutely. I think, the most important thing that kids are taught is not the facts themselves. It's the perspective through which the facts are interpreted and made meaningful.
Yeah, see, I don't even know. Like, the more and more that I look at my own experience in public schools, I was never taught how to think. I was always taught what to think. And, if I thought outside of the box, there was a problem with me. And if I didn't do it the way the math teacher wanted to do it. And I noticed this with my own kid too, because Ethan, he's pretty bright, and he confuses the heck out of me sometimes when we're doing like overview of his math. And I say, well, how did you come up with that answer? It's the right answer. And he's just like, he doesn't want it. Like, that's too much to talk about. Like, I don't want to tell you how I came up with the answer. It's like, well, I know you didn't use a calculator, and I know you didn't use the method the mom was showing you how to do it. So, how did you come up with this way? If I was a teacher in a public school, I would be like, you did it wrong, and that's why you got it wrong, because you didn't show your work in the way it was. It's like, the dude still got it right. He did it right his own way. I noticed that is like a huge difference with, the academic way of public school versus how somebody else allows their kid to do some things.
Well, yeah. There's a lot of things I could say to that. But the point I was trying to make earlier is it's the worldview that gets absorbed, and the worldview is ultimately, the perspective through which you see the world, and that informs the story that you believe about yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the most important piece of education is, what story are you going to believe about yourself? Are you going to believe that, the most important thing in life is getting a good degree, getting good grades so you can get a good degree, so you can get a good job, so you can make a lot of money? Is that the most important thing in life? Because there's people that believe that that's the most important thing in life, and they pursue that, and it does not fulfill them. And then they wake up one day when they're 40 and think, what I really need is a convertible.
Yeah. Dude, yeah. I mean, you're right. Cause like, I remember I was always like, so when I was growing up, you would meet your friends, and some of your friends would be so, I don't want to say like, oriented to do good at work, but they wanted to be like really, really good for their company.
So driven.
So they were driven really to like, all right, I'm doing this. I'm going to be the best I can for this job. And they'll work at that job for 8 years, and then something happens and they get laid off. And it's just like it's like a pop of the bubble or deflating, and it's just like, I worked really hard for this company. I proved myself, and, I'm still left in the wake of, what I was doing from now to start over, with that being like a trial and some tribulation. Back to the Odyssey, because like your writing is like, what is your favorite trial that he went through? I mean, because like the sirens, like being, because that's like there's so many different things that he went through. What do you think touches home with you most?
Well, so the story that I lived in when I was a kid, which was based on untruths, to put it nicely, was you're on your own, basically. So when the first time I started believing that was when I was 4 years old. We had moved across the country from Arizona to Michigan. I was unpacking a coloring book, looked at the coloring book, and thought that I'm not that innocent kid anymore. Now I know that I'm on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was 4, and that has, I was trapped inside that story for the vast majority of my life. And, that has consequences. If you believe that you're on your own, then, well, you need to take care of yourself. So you can't necessarily trust anybody else to meet any of your needs. So you need to learn how to meet all of your needs yourself, and you need to, figure out how everything works, and so you can take care of things. And, and it's this mindset of scarcity that I got stuck in, and so that's been my primary thing, and it's has been the biggest trap for me, and this mindset of scarcity. And so with respect to the Odyssey, this trap is revealed at Circe's Island. So for those who have watched or are going to watch the Nolan movie, the island of the Lotus Eaters is not even in the movie at all. Not in there at all. But he brings the lotus flower into the movie when he's with Calypso, but that's not how it is actually in the narrative. But he had other purposes for whatever he did.
He wanted to make it so when someone watched the show, they can watch it in one night.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah,
I think there's other themes that make the movie worth watching, but that particular one is not in there, and that's what we spent the vast majority of our time thus far discussing. But the Circe encounter is in the movie, and so if you've seen that, but it's quite a bit different than it is in the epic. But it's just this idea of scarcity. So we can. I can just summarize it real quick. I'm not sure that we necessarily need to go into any depth on this particular one, but it really resonates with me because, like I said, my mindset was just this belief that I'm on my own and I have to take care of myself. And I think a lot of people, I was at the very tail end of Gen X and the early, late Gen X, early millennial, like the kids that both parents were working full time and you came home from school and there was no one there and you could do whatever you wanted. And I used to ride my bike clear across town with no way of communicating with anybody when I was like 7 years old. Just take my fishing pole and leave and not tell anybody I left and come home when it got dark and no one asked me where I was. And, that doesn't happen anymore. But I had this self-sufficiency because I believed that I was on my own. And that's the way I saw myself and the story that I lived in. And so that had the consequence of this scarcity mindset, like I don't have time to screw around because I got to make sure that I have what I need and that I'm capable of taking care of myself. And, so this mindset of scarcity and, ultimately, when we talked about the Lotus Eaters Island, it was this fantasy of abundance this fantasy of comfort that was the trap. So each one of these traps, it has like a carrot, like something that attracts you into it. Like, oh, who doesn't like comfort? Comfort is a great thing. I'm going to go down the comfort path. But if it's a trap when you get the exact opposite of whatever it is you think you're going to get. So in that case, it's a very uncomfortable situation to wake up one day and realize your whole life has gone by and your problems have only gotten bigger in the meantime, and now you're stuck. And so much for comfort. But for this other one with scarcity, the mindset of scarcity, that the fantasy is this fantasy of abundance. Like someday I'll have everything I need to deal with anything that life throws at me, and I'll be like, I'll be able to handle it because I'll have all the stuff that I need. And so you've seen my tools, that's one example of it. Like I've got quite a collection of tools and it's been fun doing all of that, but it stemmed out of this story that I believe that I believed that I no longer believe, that I have to be prepared for any kind of situation that might come up because I can't rely on anybody else because I'm on my own, but the major symptom that this causes, this scarcity mindset, and it's a very common thing, is impatience. So I don't have the time for this. I'm sitting in traffic, like I don't have time for this because I'm too busy trying to chase this fantasy of abundance. And every minute that I'm spent, time is money. Every minute I'm wasting in traffic is a minute that I'm not being productive and building up the abundant stores of whatever I'm trying to build up. And whether that's, physical things or whether that's, social capital or whatever the case may be, just this feeling that I don't have enough.
Yeah.
And for me, given that that's my primary, vice, so to speak, it really is, in the past has permeated through my entire consciousness. So that's where my thoughts tended to drift when I was in the grip of this particular pitfall. So you wake up in the morning and think, well, I didn't get enough sleep, and then you think, well, I don't have enough time now, to get ready. Or you get in the car and you look and you're like, oh, or you hit traffic. I don't have enough time to get to work. And, I don't have, and I didn't get enough sleep. So now I don't have enough energy and, whatever. And you get there and, it's just, you go throughout your whole day, and every step of the way, there's a ever present temptation to assume it's not enough, not enough, not enough, not enough. You check your bank account, not enough in there, whatever. It's, and ultimately the most consistent symptom is just a general nagging feeling of impatience, of like, it's just not enough. Too much to do, not enough time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's so true. I mean, like, it's, I feel that a lot also, that sometimes I don't have enough of something, enough time to, days off to go do something with the family, or enough money to go do something with the family. Everybody has those feelings. No one is alone on that one.
It's part of the human condition.
Yeah. And, it's real easy to, like complain about it and like, oh man, I really wish I had more time to go do this and more time to do that. One thing that gets brought up all the time, especially with like the type of work I'm in now, when I was in the film industry, I knew I would have a lull in time, and I knew that things would pick back up at a certain time. That's all gone now. To me, it's the film industry. It's like I'm not in it anymore. It's been 2 years, and I'm kind of like still reliving the times I've been in the film industry, thinking it's probably, somewhat close to the same, but it's probably not the same at all. And I'm living in this other construction world now, and every employer wants everything from you. They feel that they're giving you the right wage. You've agreed for that wage, and you're doing work. And it's just on a whim. They're like, well, we're working Saturdays now. We're working 6/10s or 6/12s. And it's just like, well, I didn't necessarily agree to that because that wasn't in the contract when I first signed on. But okay, when do you think it's going to stop? We don't know. We're just behind right now. We're going to try to catch up. And then, you work on that job, and then, all of a sudden they lay you off because they need to really scale back the workers and focus on something. And then the next job you get, that job is like, I'm going to need you here 7 days a week. And it's just like, whoa, guy, that's not what I signed up for. I've been working here for about 3 or 4 weeks, and now you want me to come in on Saturdays? Like, I can do every other Saturday for you right now. I mean, but I can't guarantee you every Saturday. And it's just like, oh, well, that's a big problem. I have now had it up to here with construction companies and other people deciding what they're wanting you to do. And I just told the job that I'm working with now, it's like, hey, I'm not able to do Saturdays right now. And the current company that I'm working for, they were like, we understand. Cool, man. Like, let us know when things change. And I was like, oh, it was that easy. I could just let them know. And I have to go about that now because, like you said, like the feeling of not having enough time, it was real. I did not have enough time. Like when I was working 6/10s and, coming home, doing the production stuff, doing the podcast stuff that I've been doing, I've noticed I didn't have time for the family. So it's like I had to make a conscious decision. And where do I snip it? It was on the work side of working for the unions and stuff like that, like the construction side. I had to draw a hard line. Like right now, I can't do that because I have other things going on. And I was always afraid to tell people I can't do that because then what are the next words? All right, well, we don't need you then. We'll find somebody else. But now it's just like I can't care about that. Mm-hmm. I have to say no and do my life because if I don't, then I'm not going to have it to live, And I never thought it would be, it's not necessarily easy, but I didn't think it would be so understanding. But guess what? Everybody understands. They need time too. They all have families. They all want to do the same thing that I am doing, but they have reasons why they don't. So.
Right. So yeah. So there's a story that you're in.
Yeah.
And the stories change, but you're right. This is one of the primary pitfalls of the human condition is getting stuck in this scarcity mindset is ultimately what I call it. And it's based on the fantasy of someday having an abundance, having more than enough. But in the pursuit of, in the pursuit of abundance, the more you pursue abundance, the more aware you are of all the scarcity in your life.
Yeah.
So you get exactly the opposite of what you're chasing. It's chasing the wind. So in the Odyssey, this is, so obviously the antidote to impatience, which is this primary symptom that we've discussed, is patience.
Yeah.
And that's the fourth attribute of the fruit of the Spirit. We love, joy, peace, patience. So in the Odyssey, it starts with the Lotus Eater's Island. Well, it really starts with Calypso. And that is the pattern of vanity. And the way to overcome vanity is through faithfulness. Vanity and faithfulness are two opposite ends of the spectrum, and we can discuss that if you want. But just to summarize a little bit, so he starts there, and he spends 7 years of the 10 there.
Wow.
Stuck on this island.
Is that where he had a kid?
No. His son was born, or his wife, I think, was pregnant when he left for the Trojan War. So his kid is back in Ithaca.
I thought he had another kid with another lady.
No.
Oh, okay.
But he got to share a bed with Calypso, this goddess, who it says in the epic that he says in his own story that she never won the heart inside me, never. But that was her goal. Is she wanted to make him her own, her plaything, and she wanted to make him immortal. And so he's got the opportunity to transcend all of the flaws and problems and scarcities and all the stuff of the human condition, even to transcend death itself. But in order to do that, he has to abandon his homeward journey and abandon his ultimate commitments, and that would be an act of unfaithfulness.
Yeah.
So you got love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness is, so if you think of it like a wheel, so that's what I'm saying, it's in the same sequence. This is not a linear thing necessarily. It's like a wheel. So we started on Calypso's island, but that's at the end of his journey where it's faithfulness. And then the next thing after that is gentleness. And so when he gets to Scaria, where the Phaeacians are, he has to exhibit the virtue of gentleness. And the temptation there, the Scarians are very idealistic and very perfectionist people. And so their fantasy is idealism, or this idea of the perfect way to do everything.
Is that where she turned them into pigs or something?
Nope, that's Circe's island.
That's Circe's. Okay,
but this is where he washes.
I'm all confused.
He washes up on shore on Scaria.
And they treat him real good, right?
Well, he's naked because he was in a shipwreck and he loses all his clothes. He washes up on shore. He's covered in brine. All this. He's this hero that everybody's singing songs about, but he's lost all of his men and all of his ships and all of his plunder and all of his everything and even his clothes. And he washes up on the shore. And he hides in a bush, and he wakes up to the sound of women coming to do the laundry at the shore, and he takes an olive branch and covers himself and comes out in peace and extends the olive branch, and that's where that touches on this theme of the olive branch. And we have the olive branch in our the crest of the United States and all of that. But it's this attribute of gentleness, and it's a peace-seeking thing. So the biblical antidote to this whole fantasy of idealism is actually gentleness. And the reason it is because what happens with idealism is things are never going to be the way that you think they should be. So the temptation is to wrath or to anger, to get just pissed at the whole world for being so screwed up. And then you become the more you pursue an ideal, the more aware you become of every flaw.
Yeah.
And all you can see is the flaws, and the flaws piss you off, and then everything pisses you off. And, it's actually a very self-destructive trap to get stuck in, to hold on to anger, and it's warned about as a potential foothold in Scripture. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, because in doing so you give the devil the foothold, and footholds over time become strongholds, and it can become holding out. This like unforgiveness and anger. It begins with the fantasy of the way things should be, which is a good thing. Things should be a certain way. We want purity, or we want whatever, but it's when things don't go the way that you want, how do you deal with that situation? And you can get stuck there. It's a pitfall. So that's what characterizes his visit with the Phaeacians and Scaria. And so when he goes to the king, this is when he tells him his whole story. Okay, so we've covered vanity, which is the trap, which is ultimately this idea of superiority. But it results in incompetence. So incompetence in the name of superiority or vanity, and the spiritual escape from it is the virtue of faithfulness, or the spiritual fruit of faithfulness. And then we've got this situation where he's been through all this stuff and he washes up on shore and he has every reason to be pissed. But being pissed at all the injustice is not going to get him home. So he has to counteract that temptation through self-control, and he does it to the extent that a human being can.
Sure.
And he's gentle to the princess of the island, and she escorts him into the king's court, and he's gentle there, and that's how he ultimately gets his ride home. Not by demanding justice or demanding what he feels like he deserves, but by...
So that's where he got all his ships and extra warriors to get home?
No, they sent him on one of their ships, and they give him a whole bunch of gifts and stuff like that.
Okay.
But it's in Scaria with King Alcinous that he then tells his story. So he begins his own account at the island, the Lotus Eaters Island. So now we've made it up to, the top of the wheel. So we've got faithfulness as opposed to vanity, gentleness as opposed to anger or wrath or perfectionism, and then self-control on Lotus Eaters Island as opposed to this fantasy of comfort, which ultimately leads to complacency, this escapist mindset of, I'm going to go through life avoiding anything that's difficult. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then we've gone full circle to the beginning of this list. So then we're back to love, joy, peace, patience. So patience is the fourth one. And this is, we talked about that a little bit already. So this is where he winds up on Circe's island.
Okay.
But there's 3 stops in between there and where we left off. So we can go to any one of them if you want. But the reason we jump to Circe's is because that addresses the one that resonates most with my.
Well, that's why
story.
I asked. Yeah, that's where that was the last question.
Yeah. So there's this. So I hate to admit this, and I hate to say it out loud, but ultimately the name for this trap is greed, and greed is the mindset of scarcity. And ultimately, no one really thinks that they're greedy.
Yeah,
including myself. Whenever I heard a sermon about it, I'm like, not me. I'm generous, and I am in certain ways. But it's not talking about your checkbook necessarily. It's talking about your attitude towards life and the story in which you live. And if you're constantly believing that you don't have enough of something and you're stuck in this mindset of scarcity, it causes you to hoard things and withdraw your energy and withdraw your time and think, I know Bob's got a lot going on and he needs help, but I don't have the energy to help. I don't have the resources. So I'm just going to pull back. And it's that whole dynamic. So right before Odysseus lands at Circe's island, they have this encounter with the Laestrygonians, and there's this huge disaster, and he loses all of his ships and all of his crew except his one ship. And I think there's like 40 or 50 guys per ship, so he loses like 200 men in one day.
Wow.
And it's just a disaster. And then they wash up on shore at Circe's island, so they've just come through this very traumatic experience, and they're on their own. Just like I was when I was 4, and they get there and they're running low on food. So they're very conscious of that. They're trying to recuperate, and they don't want to risk losing anything else. They're very, I don't have enough. I don't have enough to risk. That whole theme is very woven into the story. And then he sees a plume of smoke rising in the distance and thinks, well, let's send a scouting party. So he sends a scouting party of his men. And they get there and they meet this nymph, Circe, who in the Nolan movie is a witch, but in the actual epic is a beautiful, youthful woman with beautiful braids. And she invites them in, and she sets them down at her table and feeds them a sumptuous meal that's laced with this potion, and the men all eat it and they turn into pigs.
That's where the pigs are. Okay, yeah.
And that's ultimately this, this image of when you get stuck in the mindset of greed and the mindset of scarcity, you become a pig, right? And you ultimately become a pig. So in this particular episode, we have that piece of it that points in this direction of this piggishness, but then also Circe herself is the feminine archetype of the greedy soul. So she she lives on an island. She doesn't have any men there, and she has all these pets. She's surrounded by pets, and apparently when men find her island and they land there, she turns them into creatures. So, they see, like lions and deer and all these other creatures. Apparently those are also men that came, but she turned them into animals, and they're her pets. And so this idea, my daughters, they're 11. My oldest is 11, and she's like, I don't want to be married. Someday I'm just going to have a farm with all the animals. I'm going to take care of the animals. And it's like, yeah, you're going to be Cersei. You're going to, live by yourself independently. I don't need any men. I have all these pets.
Yeah.
But the form that it takes in the feminine archetype, at least according to this story, is this withdrawal. And she withdraws. She doesn't trust anybody. And she turns the men into the worst version of themselves, which is pigs. And she sees so it's a dehumanizing thing, and this hoarding of self.
Yeah. See, I something making me think like, I can't explain where I watched it, but I thought that it was either her or somebody else that he had like married, or I shouldn't say married.
It was Calypso.
Yeah.
Cersei also. So, and then we have another character that arrives in this episode, and it's Hermes. And Hermes is the male archetype of this dynamic. And so he is the god of, he's a messenger, but he's also the one that transcends thresholds, and he's comfortable in any situation, any circumstance, in any region. So he's used as a messenger by Zeus. And he also is the one that carries the wisdom that anyone needs at any given time, but he keeps it in his pouch, which is hermetically sealed. The secret wisdom that only he has, that he hoards. He knows how to deal with any situation, but he's not going to tell you until the last possible moment. This hoarding of information and this hoarding of wisdom and this hoarding of knowledge. But when he gets there, he introduces he runs into Odysseus as Odysseus is going to check out and see what happened to his men, and he says, hey, you don't want to go in there yet. This is what's going to happen, but I've got exactly what you need. And he causes this herb called Molly to grow out of the ground, and that's where we get the word mollify from. So, and this Molly is going to mollify the nymph, and it's going to prevent Odysseus
to be trapped from her, right?
From being enchanted by her potion. Yeah. So he eats the Molly. He goes in there and ultimately impresses Cersei, because he doesn't fall prey to her magic, and then he convinces her, and it's his loyalty to his men. She wants to take him to bed after that, which I don't recommend.
See, I thought that man, I need to go back and look at all this stuff, because I thought that's like he laid with her for a couple years or something.
No, he refused to take her bed or to eat her food until she restored his men.
Yeah.
And so he deeply impresses her. But then they spend a year there, which you kind of need after you go through the traumatic experience that they went through of just recouping and getting over all the fear and all the trauma of what just happened. So they spent a year on Cersei's Island. But the thing that this spiritual fruit that is the antidote to this whole mindset is patience. And patience is the awareness that you actually do have the time that you need. You have the same amount of time as everyone else has, 24 hours in a day, and it's what you need. And you do actually have everything else that you need, even when you are tempted to assume otherwise. But ultimately, also, patience is, and all of these virtues are something that also need to be turned inward. So it's not just being patient with my circumstances that's the antidote to my scarcity mindset. It's also being patient with myself. And I'm not as far as I wanted to be, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily. It's not something that I should judge myself on. And this idea that I'm behind where I should be, that all ties into the scarcity mindset. So anyway, that's a bit of a complicated episode with Hermes and Cersei, but I enjoy it. And that thread of the scarcity mindset and the different forms that it takes is woven throughout the whole thing. Yeah. But Odysseus ultimately, he's not necessarily a good embodiment of the virtue of patience, but he doesn't allow the scarcity mindset to prevent him from pursuing his men, and he doesn't. The thing about the scarcity mindset is it causes you to hoard your resources and hoard your energy and withdraw, but he opposes that that tendency and that temptation, and it's only because of that they're able to continue on their voyage. So they move on. They move on from there, and I mean, we could go on and on. But you asked me which ones were the primary ones that resonated with me the most. So that particular one, that particular theme, is the one that resonates the most with me. And I still struggle with impatience, but when I realize that I'm falling into it, I have to be patient with myself and kind of laugh at it, like, oh, I know what's happening right now. I'm losing patience for what my kids are doing, or whatever.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because I remember we were in your car and I forget where we were going, but we wanted to listen to something. And you were like, I listen to stuff on 2 times the speed. And you were like, doop, doop. And I was like, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, like hoarding information and I don't know how much time I have, so I have to figure this out as quickly as possible and absorb it all. That's resulted in a lot of positive things for me. But ultimately, the story that I was in as a result of that belief was a trap, and it was a false story. And we don't need to necessarily get into how I got out of it, but that happened during COVID ultimately. But it's good news that you don't, whatever story you feel that you're in, it's not necessarily the whole picture, and it's possible to get out of that story into a better one. And ultimately, I think that's what the good news of the gospel is, hey, we got a better story. Death isn't the end. You don't have to worry about, doing everything you want to do before the grave, because the grave is actually just a doorway into the next stage of your existence. It's not the end of your story anymore, So, anyway, so the other two that I resonate the most with are Odysseus' encounter with the Cyclops, which is the Cyclops is the personification of lust, and I'm not talking about sex here. I'm talking about the desire to seek fulfillment
at any cost, right?
And possess things, and this, like this in the ancient world. The primary lust, so to speak, was the lust for greatness.
Yeah.
I want to be a great man, and I'm going to accomplish great things, and I'm going to be bigger than everyone else, and I'm going to rule everything else. And, and that's what this whole encounter is pointing to. And then the other one that I relate to a lot is the Aeolian bag of wind. They go to this island, and the king there is Aeolus, and this is a floating island. It just drifts around, and they feast constantly, perpetually on this island, and they're never really anchored anywhere, and they just float wherever the wind blows them, and they're always looking for the next exciting thing and the next novelty and the next thing that they think is going to satisfy their appetites. So that would be this fantasy of satisfaction, which causes us to constantly be dissatisfied with what we're dealing with, and I just want to escape, and I'll be satisfied. So where lust is a more of a possessive thing, like I'll be fulfilled if I have this thing, if I possess this thing. And, the cliche now is that men lust after beautiful women and women lust after beautiful houses. Just that fantasy that, once I secure this thing, then my life will be complete and I will be fulfilled. I hate to break it to you, but it's not true. But that's the form that takes. It's addressed in the Cyclops' the episode with the Cyclops. But then this satisfaction thing, this fantasy of satisfaction, is more along the lines of appetite. So it's not if I possess something I'll be fulfilled. It's if I consume something or experience something, then I'll be satisfied. And this is where appetites are at stake, and appetites can be corrupted. And this is the other side I mentioned earlier. The Lotus Eater's Island isn't the only kind of addiction. This addiction of escapism, that's one form of addiction, but the other form that it tends to take is this seeking satisfaction. This thing, like everything's better when I'm drunk or high or whatever. And I'm not necessarily trying to escape anything. I'm trying to make things better and find more satisfaction and enjoy things more. And, but it's also a trap.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a lot of people do like to use that to stake claim and like, this will elevate our evening. You know, if we just partake in some of, I do it all the time. I'm sitting there like, I want a golden monkey. Cause like I'll catch a buzz and I'll feel better and whatever, and then
you start to fixate on the thing that you think you need in order to be satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you reach out for it and even when you get the thing, but the satisfaction eludes you and it's still outside of your reach.
Yeah.
And what happens is you get trapped in the future and you can't enjoy the present moment because you don't believe you have what you need to be satisfied in the present. So have you ever gone like, for example, to a concert or something that you've been looking forward to, and once you get there, all you can think about is the next fun thing you're going to do, and you can't even like be fully present to enjoy the thing you're at.
I can see that. I mean, maybe I could definitely see that for me, especially when, for instance, just going on certain adventures or trips for me. Like we will be going somewhere and it's like, this is great. Like we're headed to wherever we're going. And halfway through the trip, the conversation pops up. When do you think we're going to go do the next thing? And like, we're all guilty of that for sure.
But that's kind of revealed in the Odyssey as this floating island and the king of the island, Aeolus, he's like, oh, I got what you need. I got this bag that I can harness the winds and stuff them in a bag. And all you got to do is put this bag in your ship and I'll trap all the winds except the one that will blow you home. And then you'll be satisfied. You don't have to, it's easy. You just go with the wind and you don't have to even row. And that's the form that these promises of satisfaction always take, is like, all you have to do is just, you don't have to do a lot of hard work. You just take a pill, and then you'll be satisfied.
What role is Poseidon? Because Poseidon messes with Odysseus like throughout the whole Odyssey, right?
Yeah. So this is interesting, and this relates to a biblical topic that has garnered a lot of interest lately, and it's this in Genesis chapter 6. There's a verse that talks about the sons of God came and took wives of the daughters of men, and they gave birth to the giants of old, and these were men of renown.
Yeah, the Nephilim.
There's this Nephilim and Rephaim, and this tradition of, saying that even after the flood, that Goliath was among this different race of humanoids that were giants, and but the premise is that they're the sons of gods, or the sons of members of the heavenly host, so angels, or so to speak. But that's exactly what we find in the Odyssey too. So the Cyclops is the son of Poseidon. And so when Odysseus blinds him and pokes his eye out, maybe we'll have time to get in the episode. I don't want to go there just yet, but when he does that, in vengeance, the Cyclops prays to his father Poseidon to curse the voyage, and that if he does make it home, may he make it home having lost everything without his men and barely even have his life. And so that gives Poseidon this angelic or maybe even demonic figure, what people call legal right. So Poseidon has the legal right to mess with Odysseus because Odysseus has hurt his own son. So he's not just arbitrarily messing with him. And this isn't a story necessarily in which the gods just do as they please and wear their playthings. He has, an agenda. And so, Poseidon, he's the so-called god of the sea, but also of earthquakes and so on. And yes, he has a chip on his shoulder about Odysseus, and he's constantly messing with him after that encounter.
Okay, so after the encounter.
But Odysseus caused the problem and brought it on himself. He brought the curse on himself.
Yeah, because he was like, I'm nobody. And then he reveals it when he's like, peace out, dude. I'm out of here. I'm really Odysseus. I kicked your ass.
Yeah,
maybe not like that. But
well, so we can get into it a little bit. So they just left the Lotus Eaters Island, and they have all this loot that they got from this massacre that they did at at Isthmus of the Cicones, and they've got plenty of food and plenty of wine. They've got all this stuff, and they land on this island, and so Odysseus wants to get home, right? He wants to get home, ostensibly he wants to get home, and that's the primary mission, is to get home. But along the way, he's like, hey, here's an opportunity to, do something great. Here we are. We've got provision. We're the victors. We're these great heroes, and there's these Cyclops. Let's go mess with them and see what happens, because we're great men, and great men do great things, and we can prove that we're great by doing this.
So that was a quest of greatness then there. I thought he wrecked somewhere and he got stuck with the Cyclops or something.
No. They had all the provision, everything they needed. They didn't have to, and they land on the island and there's wild goats. So they refill their stores with meat. They have everything they need. But this is where Odysseus is double-minded. As the scripture would say, he's double-minded. So he's got conflicting priorities. He wants to get home, but he also wants to prove that he's a great man.
Yeah.
And in this episode, that's the tension, is, the quest to prove that he's a great man is actually preventing him from getting home.
Okay. Now, is there a common theme with all the different islands where he tries to prove he's a great man? Because I know with the Sirens that he's like, tie me up.
No.
I want to be the only guy that doesn't, or the only one that hears the song of the siren and live through it or something.
The sirens, the encounter with the sirens is not about greatness per se. It's about he wants to know what they have to say.
Okay.
And so their song is, we know your grief, we know your pain, we've seen it all. It's this idea of being fully understood and fully seen and fully appreciated and all this. And it represents this siren song of, toxic therapy that has shipwrecked so many lives.
Yeah.
And just dwelling on all of your loss and all your pain. And it's a outflow of the deep desire and the fantasy of fairness.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm making them go out of order here.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. But that's tied to the theme of envy.
Yeah.
So, but the Cyclops encounter is tied to the theme of lust for greatness. And this is ubiquitous in the ancient world, and lust, as we currently conceive of it, is a result of French poets in the 14th century.
Damn French poets.
Writing about romance as the thing that will fulfill you.
Yeah.
So this idea that we would be fulfilled through romance or through sex is a relatively new idea. People sought fulfillment in other ways before that. So the Middle Ages knew nothing of sexual lust as the thing that people spent their lives in pursuit of, and the same thing of romantic fulfillment. They cared about greatness, and that's even in the scriptures as well. The disciples during Jesus' ministry, a couple times they get busted arguing about who's the greatest.
Yeah.
They're not arguing about who's the sexiest or who's the hottest, or that's the furthest thing from their mind when it comes to this thing on which they've attached their desire for fulfillment. They're not looking for fulfillment in the bed of a beautiful woman. They're looking for fulfillment on the throne.
Yeah, they want to be seated next to,
and they want to be seen as great, and they're arguing about greatness. And Jesus says to them, the greatest among you shall be the least. The one, that in my kingdom, it's the opposite of the earthly kingdom. Greatness in my kingdom is to those who humble themselves the most. But so anyway, in this encounter with the Cyclops, it's a similar theme. So Odysseus is seeking greatness, but as you already mentioned, he gets himself stuck in this cave, and the only way to get out of it is to tell the greater being, which is this giant, that he's nobody. So he's trying to prove that he's someone, but because he's trying to prove that he's someone, he gets stuck in this situation. And the only way out of the situation is to admit that he's nobody.
Yeah.
So it's really a clever.
Yeah, it was as a kind of a ploy, or not a ploy. It's like when he says I'm nobody, I mean, he may have been admitting that he was nobody, but when the other Cyclopses come to when he's actually trying to blind the Cyclops, all the other Cyclopses come to him, right? And like, who's trying to kill you? And
Yeah,
he's
who
like,
poked your eye out? Oh,
yeah,
nobody.
Yes. And they're like, oh, if nobody's doing it, all right, we're leaving.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that one. So in my series, I wrote a series of poems to introduce each one, and there's a refrain in each poem, and in this one, it's perceive. I think, so there's also this theme of the Cyclops only has one eye, and if you only have one eye, you have no depth perception. You only see things superficially, and people who are consumed with this lust for greatness, they see everything in terms of who's great and who's not great, and it's a very superficial way of seeing the world. And the Cyclops is the embodiment of this, and he's one-eyed. He only has one way of seeing things. He doesn't see beneath the surface. He's not clever. He's bold. He's strong. He's powerful. He takes whatever he wants when he wants, and no one can do anything about it. And he's just a very lusty character in the old sense. And he's happy to enter into a challenge with Odysseus of who's the greater man. And Odysseus shows up and boasts, "We're the men of the great Agamemnon, the destroyer of cities," and he's got all these boasts. But then he gets stuck in the cave, and eventually, he loses 6 of his best fighters again after having lost 6 from each ship. But also one of the themes that in the way that he gets out of this is he takes his lesson from the Lotus Island, and he brings wine with him from Ismarus, and I think they mixed it with some other stuff at that time, and so he mixes this wine, and so he tests the Cyclops self-control with the wine, and it turns out the Cyclops has no self-control.
Yeah.
So he gets drunk, and he falls into the trap that Odysseus's own men had fallen into just in the last episode at the Lotus Eaters Island, and that ultimately, he passes out, and then they heat they had turned the Cyclops' olive wood club into a spear. They heat the tip of it until it's red hot, and they thrust it into his eye, and it's bubbling and hissing and steaming, and it's a very graphic part of the poem. Is really it's really easy to get into the scene, so to speak. And then when they're getting out, the Cyclops loses patience and wants to catch these guys. So he moves the stone, which the men couldn't move. That's why they didn't just kill him outright, because they needed him to move the stone. But then he's feeling all of his goats and sheep as they leave to go graze, but he's only touching the surface of things. Again, he doesn't touching, he has no insight. Now he has no sight at all.
And they snuck out underneath.
No, they trust themselves on the underside of the rams, so that when he pats them on the back, he doesn't know that there's a warrior underneath it. So there's all these threads of this whole thing about, what is real greatness, and did this episode make Odysseus a great man? Did it contribute to his greatness? Because he lost 6 of his best men. He barely made it out alive. And after he leaves and they get back to the ship, he yells and taunts the Cyclops and say, "Oh, you want to know who did this? It's Odysseus. That's who did it. I'm the one who did it. Remember my name." And that's what brings the curse.
Yeah. Hey, Dad.
It's like the notoriously stupid thing, that a criminal leaves their mark. Like on Home Alone, the wet bandits.
Yeah, the wet bandits.
Yeah, like the stupidest thing you can do. But that's also, even the wet bandits, they're doing that because they're trying to leave their mark and prove that they're great.
Yes.
In the most idiotic possible way. But Odysseus does the exact same thing, and he brings this curse upon himself. So he gets exactly the opposite of what he was setting out to get. He wanted to achieve something great and prove that he's great, and he barely escapes with his tail between his legs and brings a curse upon his men and his ship and his whole journey home. And he gets the exact opposite, just as all the other of these primary pitfalls wind up delivering. But anyway, so we've talked about the Odyssey quite a bit, and I have the series on my Substack. It's just my name, Andrew Sawyer. .substack.com, and you can find it on the top banner. I've got the Way Home series, and
we'll have links in the description.
And you can dig into all of that. But I actually wrote a few years ago So like I said, my journey began with the Lotus Eaters, and that's where I started connecting these dots. But these dots were very difficult to connect because, and I have yet to find anybody else that has connected them in the way that I have, and that's okay. I certainly could be mistaken, or there could be a better way to portray these things. But for me, it took a long time. It took years, like a decade, like over a decade, to connect the dots. And like I said, I had been living in this story of the scarcity mindset for my whole life up until COVID happened, and that's when I realized that I had all these things that I assumed that just weren't true. And that helped me to break out of that scarcity story that I was living in. And that was the biggest dot that when you're in these traps, when you're in these pitfalls, just like when Ted was in his heroin addiction, you can't see the way out of it. And sometimes you can't even perceive the possibility of there being a way out.
Yeah.
You think that's just reality. That's just the way it is. And you have to deal with it, but you're not capable of seeing it. So something has to come from the outside to reveal the truth to you. And a lot of times the truth is revealed when you go through a traumatic situation and things that were hidden to you bubble up to the surface, and you didn't know that was in you, and it starts to change your perspective. And I think that, so for me, that happened at the first time in my life each one of my moves was a micro example with that as a child. But the first time that things really shook for me was when I was in the military and deployed. And I lost my faith in humanity, for example. I lost my faith in the government. Like, they're not going to solve this.
Yeah.
And it really like shifted things for me. But it also, those experiences are always very difficult to go through and painful, but there's an opportunity to see beneath the surface and to see things come up out of you or rise up in you that you otherwise would not have seen. So it took me a long time to connect all of the 9 dots, but I did that. The last one for me was that scarcity mindset and admitting and confessing and realizing that I was greedy, but not in the sense of hoarding money like Scrooge McDuck, just in the sense of hoarding my energy and myself and just believing that I'm on my own and I got to take care of myself and I can't really rely on anybody else.
Yeah.
Right. So all the way back then, so that was, I guess, in 2021. And for me, I'll be perfectly transparent. It was a series of dreams that I got that revealed that to me. And it's not because I'm smart or because I figured it out. It's some kind of revelation that came through a series of dreams. And we don't need to talk about those necessarily, but I put those dots together. So I had been thinking about it, and I had been trying to figure out how to tell you about it even back then. So I remember we went out for a meal, and I had a napkin, and I was trying to show you these.
I still have that napkin.
And I was trying to figure out, okay, so I have this piece of wisdom, and it's so valuable, but how do I get it and share it with other people in a way that they can understand it too? And so it took me years of struggling and realizing, well, that doesn't work, and I can't just draw it out, because this took me over a decade to grasp. And it's not something that you can just upload into someone else's mind, But in 2023, I wrote one of my first blog posts about this pattern, and I did basically an allegory of my own journey and each one of the 9 things. So if you want a very concise summary of each one of those 9 things, that's the place to go. It's called Free Indeed, and I can read that if you'd like me to, and that would be a lot quicker than going through the rest of the episodes of the Odyssey.
We can do it too. We can do whatever you want to do. Like, one of the things about having this podcast is, like, we can do whatever we want.
Cool.
Right.
Well, so if you want to, so I have them in, each one is a paragraph. So it's not really very long at all. But the allegory is like, I've always been a big hiker. So it's this idea of, like an ascent, like an ascent of a mountain peak. And, what are the things that prevent you from ever reaching the top?
Yeah. I mean, when we were at that restaurant, I remember you wrote some stuff down, and you were like, you could take this. And I took it, and it was like all of the sins along with the companion opposite, right? I just forget what you called it though. You had a name for it.
Like vices and virtues.
Yeah. Yeah. And I it's in my drawer in my nightstand, and I look at it every once in a while because it's just like, what the hell am I going through, dude? And I'll look at that, I'm like, damn it. It's like, all right. Because it's very helpful.
Well, I hope that one of my hopes for the Odyssey series is that it expands on the map. So each one of these, I already mentioned, I introduce with a poem, but then I do a summary of the text itself so that you don't have to necessarily go out and buy a copy of it. I use Robert Fagel's translation, which I think is the best. I've read probably half a dozen of them, and I like that one the best. So I do share the actual text itself, and then I do a summary of the text, and then reveal the dynamic at work. And then I have a whole section that I titled The Trap in Modern Life. So how does this apply to us today? So you could use it as a diagnostic in that way. But like I said, I wrote that this year in 2026. 3 years ago, I wrote this allegory of each one of the 9 and summarize each one in a single paragraph.
Yeah.
So for example, I say, one who had been walking for a long time believed that if he could secure certain things, the climb would become possible. He had listened to 9 voices that had joined him at different turns in the path. None of them had announced themselves as rivals to the summit. Each had spoken as a necessary companion for the journey. Okay, so this first one offered fulfillment. That's the one that we were talking about with the Cyclops. So the first had offered fulfillment and had said that the heart was made for completion and that only the right acquisitions, the right achievements, the right balances would quiet the ache that had followed him since he could remember. He had believed it. He had arranged his days around the pursuit of that completion, treating every person and every moment as possible material for it. What he received was not fullness, but a deeper and deeper longing. The more he poured into it, the more the emptiness announced itself. The steady love that came by grace began to look insufficient beside the grand project of his own fulfillment. His hands, which had been meant to give and to receive, learned instead the motion of constant reaching. The thread that bound him to this voice was thin at first, almost invisible. It grew stronger each time he chose the next pursuit over the gift already offered. So that's my best effort to summarize that particular theme 3 years ago, and that plays, like I said, into the Cyclops episode. So we can go through them that way. That'd probably be a lot faster.
we can do whatever you want. I mean, but there is a way for people to, because like my wife, she likes to read and she doesn't like to listen. In the description, we can put like a link to,
Sure.
Yeah. Like, so you guys, obviously, if reading's your thing, like my wife, then we'll be able to have it read it, but we're going to also do it the way I like to hear it. And that's by hearing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean,
so I think we've spent plenty of time on this whole concept and the theme. And, if you're still tuned in, thank you for sticking around with us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, dude, it's easy. Cause like a lot of people who listen to podcasts, they're into a lot of different things. I noticed that when I talk to somebody and I say, hey, are you into podcasts? They give me 5 or 6 different examples, and none of them are the exact same. It's not like everybody listens to Sean Ryan, Joe Rogan, Danny Jones, and, something else. They have a wide range of what they like to listen to, just like a lot of people listen to different types of music, this is an avenue for you and me. So whatever you want to do here, we can do, Yeah.
Well, so I've probably been speaking for about 80% of the time. So, I guess.
Well, that's cool.
Well, if you want to share some of the thoughts that occurred to you while I was blabbering on, I think that might be.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So like my thoughts are very simple. And like when we're going through the different Odyssey, like I look at it as like different islands on a game board, almost. And, when I'm looking at my thinking, I see the different map because like, Odysseus comes from over here, comes down to here, comes back up here, and I think like where he gets the win, like that guy who he gets the win from, he goes back there again to like try to like get more help, and he's like, no way, dude, you mess with Poseidon's boy, I ain't helping you.
Well, he gets blown right back to where he started, which is what happens when you pursue satisfaction. Is you get you don't get what, not only do you not get what you were pursuing, but you get blown right back to where you started. And this is also something that happens with every appetite. Appetites are never fully satisfied. Your appetite's always going to come back.
Yeah, just like my buddies trying to be so good for that company, they get like I didn't get the promotion, they ended up letting me go. And it's like, yeah, buddy, you got to start at the ground zero again.
Right.
It's like, to me, it's very interesting because like I like to marinate on things for a really long time before I actually even have like a something comprehensive to say, because like I think in cartoons. I think I explained this to you. Like in my head, I can see the most horrible thing and it's still happening as a cartoon, and nobody understands that except me. And, if I try to sit there and describe what I'm thinking about the Odyssey, one thing I've learned so far is like, I have no real interest in the Odyssey other than what other people say about it. I tried reading the Odyssey a little bit, and I'm not a good reader, so I had a hard time reading it. So I was like, I'll listen to it. And then the voice actor who was doing it, he has his accent, and I'm so deaf or whatever, I can't understand what he's saying. Like, it's like, it sounds like a different language. I know he's speaking English. So like, I'm just showing you how big of an idiot I am, folks. But, it's like the way I get any fulfillment out of it is by talking about it with people with you. And, the reason why I know what I know, and I'm probably misconstruing things, is because I watch a lot of videos about people who read the book and who explain what they like about the book. So I'm getting a lot of facts wrong, probably, like sitting here thinking about stuff, because like I could have swore Odysseus in his travels on the way home, he actually laid with someone and he actually had a kid with them, and that kid became something. And I mean, he ended up making it home, right? So he gets home and he kills all the people that is at home, right? All the suitors.
Yeah, there's over 100 suitors that have been all over his wife's case and eating all of his food and provisions and conspiring to kill his son, Telemachus. And so, yes. So, but this is the homeward journey that, and spiritually speaking, it's a journey to your true self or to find yourself. And the thing about the journey is he winds up getting home, but the home that he returns to is not the home that he left. And the man that arrives is not the man that left. So,
yeah.
And that's that's true to life. We go on these journeys and we are changed through the experience, but then also in our absence, home itself has been altered, So he has this vision, so to speak, of what he longs for when he gets home. And when he actually gets there, it's not what he had envisioned, And I think we can all relate to that. I think, I had a really hard time, as did most of the guys that I served with, adjusting back to civilian life after getting out of the military. But I think about the Vietnam guys that came back, and they were, very eager to get home, obviously, after having served. But they were spit on when they arrived. And like the home that they came back to was not only not the home that they left, but it was hostile to them, And I think the Odyssey captures that to some extent. And in the Odyssey, so the pivotal part of the whole thing, and I would say this probably for me is the most important thing in the Iliad or the Odyssey, is the central episode where they go down to the house of Hades, the house of death, and Odysseus has the chance to consult with this Theban prophet named Tiresias, and he has to offer some blood sacrifices because the shades or the ghosts can only speak to him if they consume the blood. And so he
Was that when he went to the underworld?
That's the underworld. It's the house of death, and and Hades, or the house of death, and Homer's Odyssey is this realm of perpetually unfulfilled longing. And so all the shades in Hades are utterly consumed with the unfairness of their situation, and with the longings that there is no longer any hope of being fulfilled. So he encounters his mother who died in his absence, and she longs to embrace him, and he can't because she's a ghost. And so his longing, it goes just as unfulfilled as hers. But also he encounters Agamemnon, who he had boasted to the Cyclops as the great destroyer of cities, the man whose fame is spread throughout the world. Well, when Agamemnon, in the pursuit of his own greatness, his own cyclopean journey, so to speak, he comes back from Troy as the victor, only for his wife, I think her name is Clytemnestra, to murder him.
Oh my.
Yeah, so he's in the underworld. He's pissed about it. He says, Odysseus, you can't trust anybody. You can't even trust your own wife. So when you get home, disguise yourself, because you never know what to expect when you get there.
Oh, he does that. That's right.
Yeah. But this is this perpetual state of unfair, of being pissed off at the lot that you've been given, which is ultimately what envy is. It's just dwelling on the unfairness of everything, and it results in bitterness. So Agamemnon, he pursued his own form of greatness, and what did he get? The exact opposite. He was murdered. He wasn't welcomed home as a victor, but he was murdered by his own wife.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys can relate to that. The unit that I was in was probably not a 90% divorce rate, and some guys got home early unexpectedly and walked in on their wives with some other guy. That's
got to be real rough.
Well, you don't want to be that guy when you're the combat veteran husband comes home and walks in on you with his wife.
Yeah, the mindset is not stable.
Yeah. So anyway, but he also in Hades. So this episode in Hades is when he speaks of all these other characters in Greek mythology, and it's the oldest record of any of these characters. So he sees Sisyphus while he's there, which is this character who has to roll a stone up a hill every day, and then it rolls back down, and rinse and repeat for the rest of eternity. And it's this embodiment of the futility of existence itself in the Sisyphean legend. And that first appears here in the Odyssey, and also Heracles and Ajax and all these other characters that later stories were based on this first mention here in the Odyssey. But the hero of the Iliad is Achilles. He's the hero of heroes. He's the ultimate warrior. He's the one that everybody aspires to be like, that everybody envies. And obviously, we get the Achilles heel and the Achilles tendon from his name, because his downfall was he got shot in the heel with an arrow. But he's in the underworld, so Odysseus is, considering himself the unluckiest man alive, and he runs into Achilles. He's like, well, surely you, Achilles, of all people, surely you are happy with the way that your life went. Like you were the greatest of all the great men, and you were the most accomplished warrior, and you were the embodiment of Kleos, which is this immortal fame that all men seek, and Achilles really turns things upside down by saying, I would rather be the servant to the poorest tenant farmer on earth than rule in Hades over all the breathless dead. Ultimately what he's saying is the greatest thing the world could give, which is the fame that I had, is utterly worthless to me here. And it's not worth dying for. And, he lived this short life of glory thinking that would bring him some fame, but it turns out that he himself admits that it wasn't worth it. It was a deal with the devil, so to speak. Yeah. So that really, I think a lot of, in European history, a lot of people got caught up in the Iliad and the romanticization of war, and thinking that really is what greatness is. And I think, a lot of men go through those phases as well. And I certainly did when I was in the military, thinking that, conquest and victory and war and all that is some kind of proof of greatness. But even as old as the Odyssey itself, we have the warrior of warriors admitting that it's all a trap.
Yeah.
And that his attitude is one of regret. And so that speaks to heroism itself, and so obviously Jesus speaks along the same lines when he says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul?
Yeah.
Anything that the world promises you in exchange for your soul is a terrible trade.
Yeah. Wow, man. I actually think that's a great place to end this, man. Because like everything that we do here does, in one way or another, it does not if we don't live right here, we don't live right by God. What are we doing here really? We're not going to find ourselves in heaven if we do stuff that is bad. And, I feel like that the biggest things that we can do here, if it's not for him, it's not going to help us anyway.
Well, that goes all the way back to the beginning of my own journey. So when I was deployed in 2006, I was asking these big questions like, what kind of man do I want to be, and what's the ideal man, and what should I aspire to be as a man, and what does manhood even look like? And I was in a special operations unit, so I had all kinds of examples around me, and from a distance, I was very impressed with all of them. But once I got to know them, I didn't want their lives by any stretch.
Yeah.
90% divorce rate and so on, and a lot of destructive behavior and stuff like that. So I had this burning question, what kind of man, what does it even look like? What does true manhood even consist of? Because I thought it was a warrior. I had that same idea that, Achilles addresses. And it wasn't, once I encountered it, it turned out to not be what I thought it was. And it wasn't what I wanted to embody. And, killing people and blowing shit up sounds really fun until you actually do it. And then it's not as fun as you thought it would be. And, and ultimately, there is an agent that steals, kills, and destroys, and you don't want to align yourself with him necessarily. Mm-hmm. So I had that question, and the other question I had at the time, because I had a few close calls with death, was, is there anything that's worth dying for? I'm packing caskets on the back of a C-130 and sending them home with a flag on them, and wondering what the hell was this for? Like, what was the point of it? Like, did this death make any difference? This kid's going home to his family in a casket, and does it matter? And I had thought, like, I'll deploy so I can get I don't have to pay taxes on my income. I can save up some money and maybe do a reenlistment and get my reenlistment bonus tax free. Well, if I come home in a casket, is that worth anything at all? Like, who cares about money if I'm dead, right? Yeah. That's not worth dying for. What the hell am I doing? So I had this existential crisis of, what is the purpose of manhood, and what is the purpose of life itself? And that's where I met Jesus, through a series of circumstances and also a dream or two. I came to realize that what I was looking for wasn't just an answer. I thought I wanted an answer, like, here's the answer. This is what manhood is. It's mm-hmm. this, or what the thing that's worth living or dying for is this thing. But instead of giving me an answer, I got a person, mm-hmm. and he is the embodiment of manhood perfected. Mm-hmm. And it's a very strange thing because it challenges all of our assumptions about what manhood is. But the things that Jesus did are far more difficult than the things that we think heroes do. He's the ultimate hero. He's the ultimate champion. And, humbling himself in the way that he did, I think, took more courage than anything anybody else has ever done. And he's the ultimate, the ultimate archetype for us to, walk as he walked, as the scripture says. But also, he showed me individually at that time, but us as a whole, that the only thing that's really worth dying for is the thing that he died for, which is love. And, but he is the answer to that question, not just the concept of love, because he died for me. So out of love, and I would be willing to lay my life down for him, because why wouldn't I do what he already has done for me? But that also answered my question and brought me a new mission. That's the reason ultimately that I got out of the military, is I didn't want to be involved in that stuff anymore. And I wanted to start a family, and I wanted to have a meaningful life and pursue that. And he kind of pulled me out of that. But I think that's the answer is, so all of these 9 traps, they're all counterfeits, and they're all things. So I'm seeking abundance, which it doesn't require any relationship. It actually pulls you away. or I'm seeking greatness, and the pursuit of greatness can destroy families and destroy relationships. Or I'm seeking my own satisfaction or my own comfort, or I'm seeking the idea of fairness, or I'm seeking justice. So all these conceptual things are not only counterfeits and traps, but they're also anti-relationship to some extent. But the answer to the question of what's worth dying for always involves a relationship and love to some extent. And all of the fruits of the Spirit that pull us out of these 9 traps are all embodied in Christ himself, who is a person. And it's only in relationship to him that we are given the wisdom and the fruit that's needed to escape these pitfalls and these traps and have a life that's meaningful and worth living. So, and I'm a testament to that. You know, I can't claim that I'm some kind of perfected man, but I have come a long way, and I'm no longer stuck in the old deceitful stories that I was stuck in for so long. And I do definitely have a growing sense of joy and peace and all the other attributes. So, I'm passionate about figuring out how to communicate those keys to other people so that they can also unlock their own prison cells, so to speak, you know.
Well, I think you do a really good job with your friends and speaking to us, and thank you for that, and dude, thanks for coming on the podcast too. Like this is huge for me, hanging out with you and getting to show the world my friends, and you're very special to me, and I consider you one of my best friends here. So it's like this wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, because you've always told me, Bob, you're the guy that likes journeys and this and that. When's it going to be enough for you? And it's just like, I don't know. I just want to do this and I want to do that. And I appreciate all the gravity that you give me. And if it wasn't for friends like you, I could easily, probably misstep more than I already do. And that's why I love this guy. And that's why I wanted to have him on. And, if you guys get a chance, I'll have links down below where you can have some of his readings. Follow him on Substack. I'll have that in the description as well.
It's all free.
Yeah, it's all free. And, and if you do like what he's doing, it doesn't hurt to help support and donate to the Substack if that's a possibility. Mm-hmm. Do you have a Patreon at all?
Well, I have a buy me a coffee thing on there that just links to Venmo, and but like I said, I'm not putting stuff out there to profit off of it. I'm actually trying to help other people and be an encouragement. And so I don't put anything behind the paywall. And if I ever do put anything behind the paywall, it's probably just going to be the comments.
Yeah.
But I don't have any problems with that yet. So
yeah. And he does really good things with the money. There was a time when Andrew was taking his own money, and when he decided to do Uber on his way to work, and he would give people, I don't know, let's just say they pay $35 for the Uber ride to get wherever they were going, and he'd give them an envelope like, "Hey man, this is for you," and he would drop them off a lot more money than they gave him, and they would open it up and be like, "What the heck's going on?" And he's like, "Drive it away."
So I like messing with people like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you've been kind of doing that stuff for a really long time. And, you're a beautiful human being, dude. And you're one of my favorite human beings. So
likewise. And this turns out to have been the best way to hang out with you. Just got to schedule more podcasts.
Oh, dude, I'm going to slow down with work. And, once I get a handle on the production side with the new TV show that we're doing, I'm definitely going to have more time. And, call me, say you want to hang out with me, and I'll make it happen. But hey, thank you guys for hanging out with us too. You can see more of Andrew on future episodes, so always come back. And if you didn't get a chance to see the episode that he was on before, look through the episodes and you'll see Andrew there.
It's not as good as this one.
Well, it's a very good one for people who consider themselves men. If you think you're a man, go ahead and watch that episode. And it'll set some things straight for you. I know I watched it. I showed some other people it. And they come out with the same conclusion as I did. It's a good episode. Very powerful, but check that out. And, tell us, how the Odyssey story worked in your life? Like, what were the trials and tribulations? And, you know, do you agree with us that abundance is just, it's a trap, and, you know, a lot of deceit will get us to do a 180 to think we need more. But like, subscribe, and thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on.
Always a pleasure.
I appreciate it so much. I love this guy. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. Have a nice evening. Take care.